So then at this point, I would like to call for my fellow board member to come on the camera if they are connected online. I know we have Wendy that's present in person. I see you guys. Wonderful. And who else we have in person? I mean, online we have John and Abigail, right?
Good morning, this is John.
Hi, John. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I can't yet see you. So let's
So my
see.
video is on. It looks like the way the screen is set up, I won't be able to see you, at least because there's a lock on the layout.
Right, I saw that. Um, Okay, that pretty much is just make a little bit difficult things for me when I know that any one of you needs to speak. I don't see you. So let me see if we can fix this in a second.
There we go.
There you go. Thank you, moderator. That will make things much better for all of us. Okay, then we are ready to start. Thank you so much for being also patient. We had some technical difficulty this morning. But here we are. Welcome to the July 29, 2022 California Board Behavioral Sciences Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting. My name is Max Disposti, and I'm the chairperson of this committee. Before we convene, I would like to remind everyone that is present that the board is a consumer protection agency charged with administering and enforcing the board laws. Where protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. The Board of Behavioral Sciences will be holding this public meeting in person and via WebEx platform. Board members will be participating in person and remotely, as you can see. I will announce when we are accepting public comments on the various issues and items in the agenda. For each public comments period, we will first be accepting comments from the participant in the audience that they are present in the room. Then the moderator will open the lines as appropriate so that the remote audience members can also comment. Each commentator will have 2 minutes to comment. And moderator, good morning to you. Would you please provide the audience instruction on how they might participate during the meeting and the appropriate times? Thank you again.
Good morning. Thank you, Max. We will be displaying instructions on the screen, and they will include instructions to type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and to send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And bear with us just a moment, and I will get those instructions in front of everybody. All right, the instructions are being displayed on screen, and we'll return to the agenda when you're ready, Max.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So it's now we can actually move to the roll call, and members, when it's your time to introduce yourself, let the public know wherever you're a public or licensed member. And I know we have Steve today to call roll to establish a quorum. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, everyone. I'll call quorum here. So Max Disposti.
Present, a public member and board chair.
Abigail Ortega.
Present.
And John Sovek.
LMFT, my pronouns are he, him, present.
And Wendy Strack.
Wendy Strack, public member.
Thank you. We established a quorum.
Thank you so much. So just before we begin, I want to remind all speakers on the public to remain on topics when we are making comments on the agenda items. The first agenda items are our introductions, as we just started, and but also this is the time when the staff and public participant can introduce themselves. Introduction are voluntary for members of the public. The staff, please introduce yourself so the public can get to know you. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Roseanne Helms, Legislative Manager for the Board.
Thank you, Roseanne.
Marlon McManus, Assistant Executive Officer for the Board of Behavioral Sciences.
Wonderful. And because
And Steve Sodergren, Executive Officer.
Thank you, Steve, definitely. I don't see if there are any member of the public present in the room from the way I look at the room. So if there are any members of the public that are present that would like to introduce themselves, they are more than welcome to do so.
Yes, we have, they actually want me to introduce themselves for them so they don't have to get up. So Jen Alley from CAMPT and Rebecca Gonzalez from NASW.
Wonderful. Welcome you both. And then, moderator, can we open to the public to see if there are any members that are participating that they would like to introduce themselves? And thank you.
We are open for public comment. If you would like to introduce yourself, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And when our first request comes from Ben Caldwell, bear with us just a moment. We are sending you a request to unmute your microphone. All right, Ben, we're going to send you another request to unmute your microphone.
Oh, no, that was it. I mean, I feel like I'm introduced.
Oh, I barely heard
you,
what you said the first time.
Ben Caldwell, LMFT.
Welcome. Next, we have Adrienne Shilton. Hold on just a moment, please. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Good morning. This is Adrienne Shilton with the California Alliance of Child and Family Services. Thank you.
Welcome. Next, we have G. Hold on just a moment, G. We are sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Associate Marriage and Family Therapist.
Say that one more time. We heard the second half.
Oh, I'm Sandy Gordon, and I'm an Associate Marriage and Family Therapist, so pre-licensed.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Kathy Atkins. Hold on. We are sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, everyone. This is Kathy Atkins, Deputy Executive Director at CAMPT, and good morning, and thank you all for being here.
Welcome. And last, we have Jeff. Bear with us just a moment, Jeff. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Marriage and Family Therapist.
We heard the second half of what you had to say, Jeff.
Sorry, I just said this is Jeffrey Liebert, Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist.
Welcome.
Thank
and
you.
I said Jeff was last, but we have a request from a call-in user. Hold on just a moment. Call-in user 3, you can dial *3 to unmute your microphone.
Thank you, everyone. This is Joy Alafia. I'm the Executive Director with the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
Welcome. And those are all our requests at the moment. Would you like to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Thank you so much. And thank you for the participation of the public. We really appreciate you being here with us today. So we're moving to agenda number 3, which is our consent calendar. However, we are going to table the approval of the April 20, 2022 meeting minutes that, until the next committee meetings. Additionally, we will be taking the remaining items out of the order. It will begin with item 5. Since we're pulling out the minutes, we're going to the meeting minutes, to item 5. I'm sorry. So item 5, the first is our first agenda topic, and it's the discussion, the possible recommendation regarding telehealth clarification for trainee and practicum. We have Roseanne here. Good morning again, Roseanne. Would you provide us with an overview? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Max. So the first discussion item today, we have been talking in the Telehealth Committee meeting about a potential telehealth clarification for trainee practicum. So right now in both LMFT and LPCC law, there is a requirement that trainees complete a specified number of hours of practicum, and the way that it's referenced in the law is face-to-face practicum. And so it used to be before COVID that was pretty much assumed to be in person, but now with the advent and high use of video conferencing, it's become unclear whether the term face-to-face is intended to refer only to in-person experience or if it's also intended to include experience via video conferencing. So the Telehealth Committee has been discussing that. And so the board is right now in the process of pursuing legislation to clarify that all trainees may provide services via telehealth. So that issue has been decided, but there's the question about what that means for practicum. And so the Telehealth Committee directed staff to draft language amending the practicum face-to-face experience hours requirement in the law to do a couple of things. So the way that the draft that you're seeing today is written is that it permits either all in-person hours or a combination of both in-person and video conferencing experience hours. And then the proposed language also recommends that the telehealth regulations that the board has in place for associates and licensees be followed for trainees if face-to-face video conferencing is used. The reason for this, trainees are not under the jurisdiction of the board yet technically, and so the committee decided against actually amending the telehealth regulations to include trainees. That's why you see the suggestion that it be followed instead. And then also in the language, it included a placeholder sunset date. So the actual sunset date would be determined when if we move forward on this, when it gets to the board meeting for approval. If the board approves it, we would set a sunset date. So the draft language can be found in attachment A. We've been doing quite a bit of research trying to look into this issue and see what other states are doing, what the national associations are doing. The way that I would just want to make clear that the way that the proposal in attachment A is written is that either in-person experience is required or in-person is required and video conferencing is optional. So you can't do all video conferencing. There has to be a combination. The committee confirmed that that's what its intent was. So this is for current in-state degrees. For older degrees, we have some language in the law that also discusses degrees gained before or begun before 2012. Those degrees are already gained, and even though that language uses the face-to-face terminology there too, staff is recommending that we not change that language because those degrees have already been gained and you can't go back in time and do anything to change that. So we would recommend leaving those alone. Applicants with experience gained out of state, there are a couple of sections of law that address this as well. We're not proposing any amendments to those two sections. That is because it could if national standards or other states are doing different things, not having the exact, in-person requirement in practicum could be a problem for out-of-state applicants, and it could actually eliminate them. So we recommend against changing anything at that time and just kind of leaving that language deliberately vague and saying face-to-face. And that's kind of in line with what we're seeing nationally in looking at research on national standards. It appears that the requirement for practicum, it's kind of still evolving. A lot of associations and stakeholders are still discussing the issue. And looking at the KCREP standards, which are the LPCC, it's kind of an LPCC national accrediting agency. It doesn't seem to be addressed there in the current language. They are actually updating their standards. They're working on a 2024 update, so we'll see what they end up doing in a couple of years. In terms of COAMPT, which is the MFT sort of national accrediting agency, they actually have updated their standards quite recently. I've included a link to their report, but page 24 addresses teletherapy and practicum. Students are required to gain 300 hours of direct clinical contact in practicum. And the language just says that if the program is using teletherapy, then it's required to have policies and procedures in place to support the practice with attention to acceptable legal and ethical requirements and current and emerging guidelines. So they're not really setting any particular requirement. They're just saying that, basically if you do it, you need to be doing it using the current best practices. You will notice in the proposed language that social work interns are not included. Social workers are a little bit different than LMFTs and LPCCs in that they have a pretty much universally recognized national accrediting agency that sets all of the requirements for in-state or for degrees and practicum. So our law doesn't even actually go into any detail about social work intern practicum at all. And so there's no need to make a change there. I did look just for informational purposes at what CSWE, which is the Social Work Accrediting Agency, is requiring. Their practicum their current document is specifies in-person contact, but later in the document it clarifies that in-person contact may include the use of digital technologies. And CSWE is working on a 2022 update of its accrediting standards, and it's expecting to finalize those sometime this summer. There's a draft out right now. It's not finalized. And the draft seems to imply right now that practicum can be done through in-person and technology-supported interaction. So it seems like they're kind of moving in the direction of you can do either. So that's just kind of FYI and what social workers are thinking as well. So in terms of what the Telehealth Committee recommended, they recommended the language in Attachment A, and we conferred with the board's legal counsel after the telehealth meeting, and it was determined that a phase-in date would also be needed because it's possible that some applicants may have obtained all of their practicum via telehealth before or during the pandemic. And so therefore we modified the language slightly. It has a phase-in date to apply to practicum gained on or after January 1, 2024. So the proposal is in Attachment A, and I'll open it up for discussion.
Thank you so much, Roseanne, for also giving us an overview and doing the research about what's happening nationwide and with other licensee as well. So really, really appreciate it. So this is the time for our fellow board members. If there are any comments, questions, or motions that you would like to move in regards to this agenda item. Okay. Roseanne, at this point, just a technicality for myself. So because there was a proposal, how would a motion read in this case under the recommendations of the research that the staff has been doing?
How would a motion read in terms of moving this forward?
Yes, thank you.
It would be, if the committee wanted to move forward with the language, it would be to direct staff to make any non-substantive changes and bring to board for consideration as proposed legislation.
Okay, just to begin the conversation, I would like to make that motion, and so that we can also open the discussion to the public. Are there any second from my fellow board members on that motion that I just moved?
I'll second. This is John Sobek.
Thank you, John Sobek. Then, moderator, if we can please open to the public so that we can see if there are any comments, inputs, and so forth. Thank you.
We are now open for public comment on item 5. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And it looks like our first request comes from Ben Caldwell. Hold on just a moment. We are sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. Good morning again. I appreciate the discussion on this, and it seems like we keep having, in some ways, the same conversation about whether the board's rules should move backwards when it comes to the acceptance of the use of technology. As you've been saying, pretty much everybody, who's been doing practicum during the pandemic got most or all of their practicum experience via two-way video conferencing. And to my knowledge, that has not caused any kind of major public safety concern. I'm certainly not aware of um, massive increases in complaints or problems at the university level that have come as a result. There was an adjustment for the technology, of course, when we first had to switch over. But it seems like people have adjusted pretty well and that client care has gone well. Given that right now the sort of vague language in law is allowing for practicum students to get all of their experience via video conference, if it's consistent with accreditation standards, which it appears to be, the practical impact of this change would be that it would be a step backward. It would be now requiring all practicum students to get at least 1 hour, and let's be clear, that's how some programs would do it. They would have students get 1 hour of experience in practicum via in-person care. I don't see that as particularly solving a problem, and I don't understand the rationale for the board moving backwards in the acceptance of technology at a time when both education and clinical work are moving forward in the adoption of technology. I think this is a solution in search of a problem, and I would recommend against or request that you do not adopt this recommendation. Thank you.
Moderator, are there any other comments?
There are no other requests for comments at the moment. Would you like to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. Well, I would just like to address, just for clarification, that the board is not taking a position against the use of telehealth. Actually, it's the opposite. The Telehealth Committee has been exploring, and also because the board has always acknowledged the positive impact of telehealth in so many different levels. So the board is not taking a stance against that whatsoever. Actually, because we are deliberating new sets of policies and procedures that are going to affect in a long term, not just as a short-term approach, but in a long term, we wanted to make sure that we could, in the meantime, not create any policy that could interfere with the final changes that are going to come very soon in the next few months. And we know that our face-to-face interpretation has been very flexible because we have been encouraged and allowing people and licensees and others to actually practice in the way they've been doing so far during the COVID time. So this is not a stand against technology. It's not a stand against actually adopting fully with full policies and procedures a new way to do telehealth. Is actually encouraging to come with a set of comprehensive guidelines that will allow us to really fit right into the changes that are already there, which we fully acknowledge and also actually even have embraced in the past 2 years. So I just for clarification, I want to make sure, because I understand the comments that were made in regards to the challenges of seeing this as a step back. But in reality, this is not changing anything. It's just giving the possibility to the Telehealth Committee and our board to actually legislate and propose legislative efforts that are actually more comprehensive of this change that can make that defined route more clear for everyone. So at the moment, no one will not, the face-to-face interpretation remains the same in terms of with all the flexibility that we have given to the case. So I hope, Roseanne, I spoke clearly to what was proposed. So if I have misinterpreted, please let me know. But that was the intent of the motion I have, and also based on the report that you move forward.
No, but thank you, Max, for that. I think your interpretation, you are interpreting correctly. Right now, the law as written, we're interpreting face-to-face. Face-to-face is in person or two-way real-time video conferencing. I also want to, we still have, we have at least one audience public comment still, so I'd like to turn it over to Jen Alley from CAMP first before we move any further.
Thank you, I appreciate that, I couldn't see it. So, moderator, if, oh, she's present, right, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks.
sorry, folks.
There's a button on the bottom.
It's on.
Oh, it is.
Good morning. This is Jennifer Alley with the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, and we have been discussing this issue for quite a long time, and we just really like to, thank the board staff and board members, and especially the Telehealth Policy Committee for being so respectful and responsive in considering CAMP's concerns with, how telehealth will be implemented in the future and how it will shape and impact the next generation of clinicians, right? We've been advocating consistently for, a system and a process that will allow for future members of the profession to be proficient in in-person and technology-driven therapy. And so we have been, going back and forth, and as, one person commented the way the language is drafted that, it could mean 1, hour minimum of in-person experience. And so that does cause us a little bit of pause and some concern, but we think that this is an issue that we'll continue to discuss if the board does make the determination for legislation that, keeps the conversation going forward for another year or two. And so, because, we just don't know, right? There just aren't a lack of, we haven't been able to find any real thorough, detailed studies that say, clinicians that have been only received, experience hours prior to licensure via telehealth are as proficient or not as in-person therapy. And so I think that's where our pause comes. It's not, we don't want to just move forward or we don't like technology. We fully embrace telehealth and we understand, how the pandemic changed things and how much, clinicians and their patients have both benefited from the ability to use telehealth with, less discounted visits and whatnot, kept appointments. So we appreciate that. And so we just kind of wanted to go, we still have a little bit of concern, right, about the minimum of 1 hour. We're going to continue to think about that internally. But again, we appreciate just the responsiveness of the BVS with us. I would like to suggest the sunset date aligned possibly with other telehealth sunset dates to continue the conversation. I think my copy of the motion has that sunset date blank. I'd like to suggest 2026, which I believe is the date for remote supervision to be reviewed. We think that might kind of let the conversation continue consistently. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much as well. Perhaps for those of you who are present, if you can point out when there are members of the public that are present that they would like to speak, I would really appreciate that because I can't see it from here.
Okay.
Is there anyone else from the
I
public?
believe Wendy. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
No one else from the public here?
Yes.
I think Wendy, board member, had a comment.
Sure.
Did you?
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess are members of this committee also on the Telehealth Committee? So if I had questions on kind of the conversation that happened before, is there overlap on that?
I think John.
Yeah.
John. I think no, not telehealth. Okay.
Nope.
Well, I guess on the question that was raised by CAMP about having a minimum number of in-person hours, was that talked about in the Telehealth Committee, and is there a reason there isn't a minimum?
It was talked about in the Telehealth Committee. There's not really a standard that's emerged. We couldn't find any examples of another state going into that level of detail where it's saying somebody in Practicum needs to have X number of in-person hours versus video conferencing. We're not seeing it. Also, we looked at the national accrediting agencies. We're not seeing, they're kind of going in the opposite direction. But the concern with specifying an exact number of hours is it's kind of going opposite from what we're seeing elsewhere. And also, if other states don't do that, and we're taking out-of-state degrees, then all of a sudden we're having an inconsistent requirement from out-of-state versus in-state, because we can't, without rejecting out-of-state applicants that don't have, let's say we required 300 hours or 50 hours of in-person practicum, and other states aren't doing that, then if we had that requirement for everybody, all of those out-of-state applicants would be outright rejected, and you can't make up practicum. So we don't want to have that sort of situation either.
Max.
Yes, I can see you, John. Go ahead.
Hey, everybody, it's John Sovak. So I do have some thoughts on this. And when we're talking about required hours, I was also curious, though, could it be put in such a way as a percentage? So no more than 50% of experience hours are gained through telehealth. My thoughts behind this are that as a clinician myself right now, my practice is a mix of in-person and telehealth work. I think to provide our trainees and practicum people with the best possible experience, a mix is actually really important. I think the idea of leaving the door open in a way that it could be just 1 hour is not going to give us fully trained clinicians as they move forward in their licensure process. So I'm curious, is there a way to do it on a percentage basis, Roseanne?
Roseanne, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, we could definitely do it as a percentage, and we kind of talked about some different options, I think, in the Telehealth Committee. I think that the concern with doing that right now would be that it's kind of moving in a different direction of what we're seeing sort of trending nationally. But, you know, obviously with our in-state applicants, the board can choose to require that if it wants to.
So since I moved the motion, Roseanne, unless there is anyone else, sorry, I don't want to jump into anyone else.
Mr. Chair, I have a follow-up. I guess after the practicum hours, and then, you know, they have the 3,000 hours after that. Is there an in-person requirement for those hours?
No, there's not. It's up to the supervisor and the
okay, so theoretically, you could have somebody go through with almost
theoretically you could
to know
yes
person experience.
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. No, I was saying that I stick to my motion just because I do like the brainstorming and the idea that could be coming forward, but I don't feel like I have enough material to even determine, you know, to move from 1 hour to a percentage, because that also the way we calculate that could be different from agency to agency. Might open a can of worms that I don't have enough material to say that could be a way to go. And so speaking to what we have so far and how it's been working so far, which has been very flexible for different agency and service provider, I feel like that what we have at the moment, until we have a redefinition of the whole telehealth as a practice, it could be the best way, because we haven't received any feedback that was contrary to the practice of people operating out there. So I feel like more comfortable to stick to where we are, just because we don't have enough data that could show us that perhaps a different kind of approach might be more beneficial. But I'm confident as we move forward, we are receiving more and more feedback from the public and from our licensee to better understand what will work in certain settings versus others. So my motion still stand, but we're more than welcome to continue the conversation. So by any means, I don't mean to cut it short that way.
This is the moderator. When you're done with the in-person comments, we have comments online.
Okay. Any other board members comment? Okay. Moderator, if we can move back to the comments online, I will really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Our first request for comment comes from Kathy Atkins. Bear with us just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, this is Kathy Atkins. I just wanted to, again, reiterate the thanks of other contributors to you all tackling this issue. It is admittedly incredibly complicated, as you can see from the different comments and questions, but that I think is what lends itself to the desire of CAMFT to take a reasonable and intentional approach versus just kind of jumping into changes. The BBS has made quite a few changes over the last year and a half, reasonably so, based on the needs to pivot, the desire to pivot, looking at the technology landscape. And I think when you make so many changes at once, it's not that they're not needed, but you don't have a reasonable way to determine the success and failures. You have these sunset dates, which makes sense. So you get a chance to review, was this a good choice, bad choice? But if you make so many at once, how are you able to actually weigh if there is an issue, which of the many changes cause the issue? I don't even know how you begin to determine that. Again, I think, CAMFT, as well as every other organization out there, is very pro technology, pro telehealth. We absolutely support trainees getting telehealth hours and training, but to make a global change of, at least for MFTs don't need to have in-person training at all before becoming a clinician. There is admittedly a pause there. And I have heard well, there hasn't been any proof of safety concerns to date. I mean, we're not talking 10 years here. We're talking very recent past. For example, schools are just starting to see the damage done to students who were unable to attend in person. I mean, we're just hitting that. And so I'm not saying that there is per se any damage, but these pre-licensees, they haven't been licensed. How are we supposed to say they make great licensed clinicians without in-person training when they haven't become licensed clinicians without in-person training? So again, we're not trying to make a statement that we're against some of these things or that have a desire to step backwards. We want the board, as the consumer protection arm, to take their time, take a look. And you still have the board, you still have the legislative process. So that is our ask, is that we sort of slow down with this one aspect, as there's so many other changes going on. So again, I thank you. I thank all the stakeholders. And as a quick aside, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. We have been reaching out to our members to get feedback. And while it is mixed, I would say the vast majority that at least we're talking to do have a similar pause of the supervisors and the educators of going fully remote without any in-person training. So again, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Moderator, do we have any other comments from the public?
Next, we have a request from Michelle Crawford Morrison. Bear with us just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, this is Michelle Crawford Morrison. I hope that I'm audible and you can hear me. I'm an LMFT, LPCC, and I'm an educator at more than one university. I teach clinical courses and I also supervise trainees at a university counseling center, which has been completely virtual since COVID started. I just want to agree that we should go slow on passing legislation that would make a decision about the number or type of hours trainees have to get, especially since we know that there is more training that's going to occur post-degree before licensure. And I think that others have already mentioned that there is no real research either way to either say that clinical training online is causing problems or not causing problems. The research that we have looked at shows that online education and remote, whether synchronous or asynchronous, has been just as effective as in person. So thank you all for bringing the subject up and for letting me have a time to comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next we have a request from Wildum. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone. All right, Kurt, we see that you've unmuted. We don't hear you yet.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead,
Okay.
please.
Hi, my name is Kurt Widhelm. I've taken a number of roles in this profession as an educator, as a practitioner, as a supervisor, and have been to a number of advocacy committee meetings. And in 2016, when we were re-evaluating the supervisor legislation that changed the supervisor requirements, I had made a comment in front of that committee of when it was being discussed about online training and very much the same discussion. And at the time, I'd made a comment of, what if there's a worldwide pandemic? And everyone kind of laughed. And lo and behold, 4 years later, we did have something happen. I'm asking at this point now with some real world experience of not becoming overly restrictive in having a certain requirement of in-person hours. We've had a number of students through the past couple of years, whether it's through disabilities, whether it's through people, we always add in armed forces at this point, of people who may have other difficulties in being able to reach those in-person requirements. And I agree with the overall sentiment here of slowing down and adding these into the considerations of the practicalities of becoming overly restrictive at a time when we're still facing pandemic-related issues ends up becoming something that what we've seen in having people move back to areas and when the waivers for telehealth supervision have ended, and then to find out once those waivers get extended after those dates has become very difficult for a lot of people. So the practicalities of some of these restrictions, I would like some of the forethought to be put into this, because this does affect some of our applicants who may face extra challenges just because we don't know what will happen here going forward.
Thank you. Moderator, do we have more requests for comments?
There's a request for comment at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you again for contributing to this agenda item. Can we move back to our board? We still, I have a motion standing, and I don't know if, John Savek, are you still confirming the second on the motion? If there's not more discussion, then I would like to call.
Mr. Chair, I just have one question. Is it okay?
Yes, sure.
Okay. I guess sort of my question, hearing the public comments and hearing from Camp, I definitely understand and hear and sympathize with this request for a standard of a minimum, but I think based on the research that Roseanne's done, there really isn't a standard to refer to or some guidepost to use, and without a guidepost, it feels a little arbitrary. Whatever number we would pick would feel arbitrary, and then this in-state and out-of-state issue, I think, still kind of nags at me. So I think I'm inclined to move the item forward, but this will go to the board as well. And so I guess I would encourage folks that are offering the feedback about establishing a minimum kind of help us through that process of what, rather than it being an arbitrary process. I think I would be open to the discussion, but just with some form of guidepost involved.
I'll add to Wendy's comment. I think that it is an option here. Moving forward with the language is one option. Making changes to the language is an option. It's also an acceptable option to choose to wait and not move forward with the language too. And we can either do that at the committee or move it to the board, and the board can decide that. And one legitimate choice would be, let's give this some more time. We just want to have the discussion so that we can kind of explore what the best course of action is.
Thank you both. I think that, as Wendy properly reminded us, that obviously this is not the final decision. It's a recommendation that this committee sends to the board. and in lieu of the conversation we had where the majority really felt really compelled about making sure that we are moving slow on certain decision making, I lead the motion on the floor to send the recommendation, and we have a second. And unless there are any other inputs, I would like to call for a vote. And John, are you the one calling for the vote?
Oh, yeah, you can ask me to take the vote. So here, I will do that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And the motion is, do we want to restate the motion again, Sabina?
I can restate the motion. The motion would be to direct staff to make any non-substantive changes to the language shown in attachment A and to bring it to the board for consideration as a legislative proposal.
Thank you. Max Disposti?
Yes.
Abigail Ortega?
Yes.
John Sovic?
Yes.
And Wendy Strack?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Roseanne. We're now moving to our next agenda item, which is item number 6, is the discussion and possible recommendation regarding the draft statutory language for a temporary practice allowance. Roseanne, can you please introduce us to this again?
Sure, thanks, Max. So the board currently requires a therapist to hold a valid and current California license or registration if the individual is engaging in therapy via telehealth with any client who is physically located in California. That's in our regulations, and there's currently no exceptions to this. So we've been discussing at the Telehealth Committee possibly creating some exceptions to this because many states have, although some states have a similar requirement to what California does, you must have a license in that state if the client is located there. There are some states that allow flexibility so that clients who are traveling or are transitioning to living in a new state can obtain temporary services from their current therapist for continuity of care purposes. So attachment B, we did quite a bit of research on this topic. Attachment B contains a comparison chart summarizing the various temporary practice allowances in some other jurisdictions. And so attachments C through J show the actual text of the law for those jurisdictions. And what we did is we took a look at all of these features, and we had a discussion, and some of the features that staff and the committee members liked, we drafted into a proposal. So that language is shown in attachment A. And what the proposal does is it permits one temporary practice allowance per year. If a second temporary practice allowance is needed, staff would suggest that the person should utilize the board's license portability pathway to licensure, and that's where they have 2 years of practice in another state. They pass the California Law and Ethics exam and take some California-specific CE coursework in California cultures, California child abuse, and California Law and Ethics. Another feature of the proposal, the applicant for temporary practice would self-attest to meeting the qualifications online. The person would provide the date they are going to begin the temporary practice with their client, and then the Breeze system would auto-generate a receipt, which would count out the 60-day window and calculate their expiration date of the temporary practice allowance. Also want to note that the current proposal only allows temporary practice allowance for out-of-state licensees, not registrants. That could obviously be amended to change in the future, but it was thought best that we just start with licensees and see how that goes. The current proposal only addresses temporary practices for individuals with an equivalent license in another state at the highest level of independent clinical practice. So it does not address temporary practice for mental health license holders in another state where there's no equivalent license in California. A lot of states have various differing mental health practitioners licenses. Some are equivalent to California, some are not. So this would only address equivalent licenses. In the previous Telehealth Committee meeting, the committee directed staff to bring the proposed language to the Policy and Advocacy Committee for consideration as a legislative proposal. So if the committee wanted to move forward on this today, the motion would be to direct staff to make any non-substantive changes and bring to the board for consideration as a legislative proposal. So with that, I will open it up for discussion.
Thank you so much, Roseanne, as always, to help us through with the overview about the bill and the implications as well. Are any comments of questions from the board?
This is John Sovek. I have a curiosity.
We accept those.
True. This is actually a question for Steve. I'm curious about the use of self-attesting about qualifications and then that going through Breeze. Do you have any concerns on staff's ability to monitor any of these waivers and how you're considering approaching that?
Actually, I would not. With Breeze and the self-attestation, basically, we would hope that they would go through that process, and if we ever had a complaint against that, then that's when the staff work would really would be generated from complaints. Beyond that, it really would be a manual process for them to do, and we would have, very little, I guess, workload in monitoring that, if that makes sense.
And so just because I want to make sure I'm understanding this then, if I self-attest, we're not actually going to be vetting any of that information. It will be only if something goes wrong that we'll be investigating what was put into that form.
That's what I believe the process would be. If it was opposite and we wanted to go in a different route where we wanted to vet, then yes, it would be a huge staff workload. We would have to ask for a couple positions.
Okay, so with that information, one of my concerns is, are we doing public safety protection by doing it by self-attesting? Is that opening up windows for things that may not be 100% legit? Is that a concern we have to do for public safety?
I think it actually adds a greater layer of safety than currently right now. I assume, and I hopefully people are not doing this temporary practice, but I think this it has a method for people to actually come into the state, and I guess legally I can put practice for a temporary period. So I think it actually adds, even with just the self-attestation, it adds a layer of consumer protection, just more than we have now.
Thank you, John, for those questions, and thank you, Steve, as well. Is there anything else, John? I want to make sure. Okay, thank you. Roseanne, are there any other questions from the board or comments? Roseanne, if we are moving for a motion, what would be the language on this motion if we're going to propose?
So the language would be to direct staff to make any non-substantive changes to the language and direct staff to bring the language to the board for consideration as a legislative proposal.
Okay. Is any of my fellow board members would like to make a motion? Okay, I'll move a motion and to put the motion on the floor. Are there any second? Or any other proposal? Okay, we'll open unless there are people present in the room that would like to comment.
There are, yes.
Do we need a second, Sabina, or?
We can wait for a second if it's not coming. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, we can wait for a second. We can always take public comment and circle back to our discussion.
Right, and knowing that there is a motion on the floor, yeah.
Are we ready for comments on the
Moderator, we have comments of people that are present in the room, and then we'll move to the web comments. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like we have Rebecca Gonzalez from NASW California first.
Does this work, the microphone?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, great. Different one? That one works. Okay, once again, I'm Rebecca Gonzalez with NASW California. During the pandemic, we definitely saw a need for people from out of state who wanted to do temporary practice. It probably was the #1 phone call we received, and concern about those people who were here temporarily. So I do like the direction of this proposal. I understand some of the concerns, and I would suggest a sunset date, so this could be evaluated in the future. But I do see a need for a temporary practice allowance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public that's present?
Yes, good morning, Jennifer Alley with the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, also in support of utilizing temporary practice. We too get a lot of phone calls about this, people coming in and going out of the state, and so we do think that this will help, patients that are here on a temporary basis to be able to maintain a relationship and some continuity of care with their existing providers. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else from the public that's present? Okay.
Max, this is John Sovek. May I ask another question, please?
Sure, absolutely.
Rosanna, my understanding this, or Steve, whoever has the expertise, or Marlon, my curiosity in this case is this one time, is this for one particular client? Is it for one particular time period with multiple clients? What is the actual waiver creating?
So it would be, it's written to be one time per year. It's a 60-day window. So if for some reason, there was a couple of clients during that time, the law does not prohibit that. Maybe they're seeing a couple or a family. That would be fine. So we did not specify the number of clients during that 60-day window. We just want it to be 60 consecutive days, and it was written like that because we don't want it to be something where somebody says, well, there's 52 weeks in a year, so I'm going to see all my California clients on Friday and never get a license. And so I don't see an issue, and the board can discuss if they'd like it with the 60-day window, however many clients they want to see. I think we've got the safeguards that the client has to already have been a client of the therapist beforehand. And so there's no limit on the clients in the 60-day window.
And has there been any examination of how this might affect what we'll call the mass market online therapy groups? I prefer not to name them, but that are trying to expose national telehealth therapists at your fingertips?
It shouldn't affect, a California license would still be required to do that. I don't see too much of an effect because it's just a 60-day window. With a client, they have to attest that the client was already a client before the client was located in California. And they need to have a license. They have to inform the client where they're licensed and provide that license number already. So I think that we've written it pretty fail safe so that somebody couldn't, not obtain a California license and just practice perpetually. It's really just a limited time.
Yeah, and that 60 days, I think, really helps out with that too, because you wouldn't want to start, a client and then, 60 days you can't do anything anymore until next year. So
the reason we chose 60 is we get a lot of calls from people that are moving to California and they're maybe going to be transitioning, but we wanted to give them a sufficient time to actually find a new and transition to a new therapist. With the shortage, it can take a little bit of time to find a mental health provider. So that was the reasoning for the 60 days.
Thank you.
Thank you again, John, for providing those possible scenarios. Any other comments from board members? Otherwise, we will, again, I have a proposed motion on the floor, but not a second yet. But we can open to the public and see if there are any comments from the public in there. They're not in the room.
Mr. Chair, I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Moderator, can you please open to the public? And
absolutely. We are open for public comment via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the motion?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor moved by me and second by Wendy Schreck. And if there are not further comments, we can call the vote. Steve, if you can help us with that, please.
Yep, I'd be happy to. Calling the vote, the motion is, can you read it just again?
Yeah, the motion is direct staff to make any non-substantive changes and to bring the language to the board for consideration as a legislative proposal.
Thank you. Wendy Strack?
Yes, I wasn't ready to be
I'm
first.
sorry, yeah, I'm going to go backwards. I don't know. Mix it up a little bit. John Slovic?
No.
I'm sorry, yes. Abigail Ortega?
I'm going to say no.
Huh? I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Is that
No.
yes or no? Okay. And then Max Disposti?
Yes.
Motion passes.
This is Sabina. Wasn't that
Oh.
2 yeses and 2 nos?
We had three yeses, 1 no.
Oh, sorry. Oh, no, I don't.
Oh, 2 no?
We only have 4
2
members,
nos.
right?
Right.
It was three yes, 1 no.
No, John
2-2?
voted.
Sorry, okay. Didn't hear that right. Apologize. 2-2. So motion.
2-2, I believe the motion hasn't passed, correct?
Nope. Motion hasn't passed.
Okay. And that the procedure for this, Roseanne, will be just resubmit this to the board, or what will be the procedure for this motion? For this
It would
item?
not move forward.
Okay.
This is
So
Sabina.
the board will not get to discuss this?
No.
Okay.
This is Sabina. If there's some proposed amendments to the language that anybody wants to discuss, and then there can be a potential motion with additional changes or anything like that, that is a possibility still if you want to discuss the language with some amendments, and that could possibly move forward to the board.
Right. If there are, yes. Abigail, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sabine. I'm wondering if it could be more, why 1 client per year? Why not more clients and perhaps like 6 months? And I'm just thinking of like for people that leave the state, like supporting them in transitioning, right, to a new therapist or, facility. A lot of people are moving. So like I have there's more than 1 client per year that is transitioning. Students go to school, right? To college sometimes. So yeah, that's where I am, like 1 client per year. I would say is too low, and also like less time. So
Thank you, Abigail. Roseanne, would you like to address that? Otherwise, I can also speak to it. I would prefer.
So, sure. The reasoning is, so we are sensitive to the fact that there are people that are moving and it takes time to transition and things like that. We have to kind of balance that with, if somebody's going to be doing therapy with somebody here long term, we do already have a process in order to get a California license. But in those sort of cases, we would want them to have certain, if they're going to be seeing multiple clients here without a California license, then it sort of negates the need to get a California license if we're not requiring them to do certain things like taking California law and ethics, passing our California law and ethics exam, taking a California cultures class, things like that. So we have to balance it with like letting somebody see their client to kind of wrap things up if they're going to transition or if they're just here temporarily, versus kind of opening the door for therapists or some of the more national corporations to sort of exploit California licensing laws and skirt the need for a California license. For example, the reason that we're not doing it with multiple clients, we don't want somebody to keep submitting a request. So we would block that out on Breeze. We don't want somebody to keep submitting under the same license number or a request to do therapy continuously throughout the year and never get a California license. If they're going to be doing therapy long-term, the thought is more, we have the portability language that we put in, or allowance that we put in a couple of years ago that really streamlines the ability for an out-of-state licensee to get a California license. So they should do that if they're going to be doing that kind of practice.
And this kind of is based off of, I think, most of other states that have the similar with that kind of restriction. So
yeah,
it's not uncommon.
So other states, actually, 60 days is a lot more generous than a lot of other states do. We did want to recognize, though, that it's taking, some time to transition, but most of the other jurisdictions seem to allow about 30 or a little less. So that's why that was chosen.
I would like to add something. I appreciate Abigail bringing this up, actually, because it allows us to have a conversation for those people that perhaps are new to for those of us that are not licensee. I think what I see is that it could become a practice of opening a practice that allows you to intervene for 6 months. I know there are some therapeutical practices perhaps can fit during that time frame. And remind you that California has a high standards when it comes to protections of our minority, the people that we serve. I can think about, I know that myself, or even John in the past, we bring this as an example because unfortunately it's very harmful to reparative therapy, for instance, where in other states it's allowable, and people could use the open window of 6 months to practice unethically based on California standards. They create a practice around that, where now you're allowing multiple clients to go under a certain kind of intervention that is short and unfortunately very harmful to possible clients. So I see this as a protection of our clients as well. And that was just an example. And also in looking, like Roseanne says, what's out there, it was a very generous opening, and without interpreting what John was saying, but I think John was going in the opposite direction, right? The concern about this becoming even too flexible in terms of time and numbers. So, but I appreciate your conversation, Abigail, of opening this, because it allows us to have, see this from different perspective as well. So thank you. John, I know you want to comment on that.
So, Roseanne, I'd like to suggest that we refer this back to telehealth. And my biggest concerns are some of the, I guess we're going to call, like what Mac was addressing, just some of the safety issues. The self-attest thing is something that does concern me. We are definitely, in our conversation, talking about maybe individual practitioners who would come from an ethical stance, which I totally support. But I also recognize that we do have a telehealth industry out there right now that sometimes has different ethical standards in their approaches to care. And so those are some things I might like to refer back to the Telehealth Committee to look at some of those issues to protect our stakeholders.
Thank you, John. I don't know how practically we can do. I mean, obviously our staff can refer back to our Telehealth Committee. So in understanding that where some of the board members are seeking some more changes to the proposal. Is that possible, Roseanne? Obviously, we don't need a vote for that because it's just a recommendation. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, we can kick it back to the Telehealth Committee. That's fine, and they can have the discussion.
Okay. Thank you so much. And John, I also advise you, if you are able to, obviously our board members are welcome to participate to other committees as public members. And so that will be a great opportunity for you to voice your concern, as well for you, Abigail. So to bring your concern to the other committees so that if it comes back to us, we'll be also more perhaps maybe in agreement or disagreement. That's okay too.
And this is Sabina, if I could interject real quick about that. I know staff always takes copious notes, and when it comes back to telehealth, when Roseanne puts together her amazing memos, she will include the discussion from today with the concerns already noted. So they will already be there to begin and be the foundation of that other discussion.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you for that reminder, and thank you, Roseanne, again. So at this point, we don't have a motion. We had a motion that didn't pass, so we're moving on to the next agenda item. Give me a second. It's item number 7, and yes. So the next on the agenda is the discussion on possible recommendation regarding statutory changes to address the 6-year limit on experience hours and associate registrations. Thank you, Roseanne. If you can please introduce us to the item.
Thanks, Max. So the next part of our discussion today is going to have to do with the 6-year rule. And there's actually 2 6-year limitations for registrant who are gaining supervised experience hours. We've kind of referred to these together as the 6-year rules. One of them has to do with the age of experience hours. Hours of supervised experience need to be completed during the 6-year period prior to submitting the application for licensure. So basically when they're submitting to take their clinical exam. Once experience hours are 6 years old based on the submittal date of the application, they expire and they don't count toward a license. They don't all expire at once. They expire as each individual hour expires as it becomes 6 years old. And so that's the current practice. There's one exception for this for LMFT applicants who can gain pre-degree hours. Their 500 hours of their clinical experience gained in supervised practicum as a trainee is exempt from the 6-year requirement. Once an applicant gains all of their required 3,000 hours and obtains eligibility to take the clinical exam, the hours are locked in until the exam is passed and the person obtains licensure as long as they attempt the clinical exam each year. So that's the first 6-year rule. The second 6-year rule is the private practice prohibition. An associate registration can be renewed 5 times, and so it can be held for a total of 6 consecutive years. If the supervised experience has not been completed, or if they need another registration because their employer requires that, maybe they're working in a non-exempt setting, a new registration can be obtained as long as the California law and ethics exam has been passed. However, individuals issued a subsequent registration number are not permitted to work in a private practice setting. So if you have a second registration number after those 6 years, there's no work in private practices or professional corporations, and there's no exceptions to this. So those are the 2 6-year rules for LCSW, LMFT, and LPCC statutes. LEP law is structured a little bit differently, but they also have a 6-year rule limitation. LEPs don't register with the board to gain their hours or anything like that, but they are required to gain 2 years of full-time experience as a credentialed school psychologist, and the experience there also needs to have been obtained no more than 6 years prior to application for licensure. So in the past, historically, the rationale that the board has given for the limits are that they protect the public by ensuring applicants for a license have recent relevant experience, and also ensures that applicants continue progressing through the licensing process, and by prohibiting working in a private practice perpetually without ever becoming licensed. So, and also doing a little research, it appears that both the LMFT and LCSW programs have always limited the length of registrations. Initially, it was to 5 years, and then it was increased in 1986 to 6 years. So we've had a lot of discussion over the years at various committees. We've discussed the 6-year rule. It seems to come up for discussion every 2 to 3 years. The last time we discussed it was in the licensing committee in November 2021. And options that the committee had considered in the past, the committee had considered allowing exceptions to the 6-year rules for applicants due to specific circumstances, such as military service or a disability or being a primary caregiver. The committee has considered extending one or both of the 6-year limits to a longer period of time, such as 7 or 8 years. Potentially considering abolishing work setting limits of a subsequent registration number, but possibly implementing stricter requirements to obtain a subsequent registration number. Determining if the recent law changes meant to streamline the license process have reduced the average time to gain a license. So, and typically what the board has done in the past is we've been working on a number of law changes to sort of make the licensing process more streamlined for out-of-state applicants, make it a little bit easier to gain supervision. So we've focused in the past on doing a lot of different things to that effect. We've eliminated what we called the buckets back in 2016, which are very specific categories of experience that LMFTs and LPCCs had to find. So instead of obtaining all these very specific types of experience, now the experience hours are just clinical and non-clinical. So they don't have to worry about finding so many categories. We've decreased the required experience hours for LCSW applicants from 3,200 hours to 3,000 hours in 2019. In 2019, also the board allowed triadic supervision in lieu of individual supervisions to hopefully free up more available supervisors. In January of this past year, 2022, allowing private practices and corporations, they are now able to utilize contract supervisors instead of supervisors that had to be employed there before. Also in January 2022, the board increased the allowable number of supervisees per supervisor in a non-exempt setting from 3 to 6, again, hopefully free up more supervision and make it more readily available. And right now, there's a proposal that's looking very promising that everybody I know is following along with, which is to permit supervision via video conferencing in all settings. That's currently proposed via AB 1758. And so that would also hopefully make obtaining a supervisor and thus gaining supervised experience hours a little bit more readily available. So those are some of the discussions we've had at the board and committee level in the past. Just a little bit more information and data, some common reasons for needing a subsequent registration number. Staff in our licensing division talks to registrants daily, and so they have a pretty good pulse on why. Sometimes a registrant stops gaining hours to raise a family, or they have an illness, or they're a caregiver for a family with an illness. They might be working part-time or unable to find a job or a supervisor. Sometimes they still need a registration number for work purposes, like they're in the exam cycle or applying for a license, but they need to have another registration number. They were denied a portion of their hours and they need to make up a few more hours. Or we have some individuals that were registered with the board many years ago. They decide not to pursue licensure. Their registration expires, and then they later come back and get a second registration number because they have changed their mind and decided to pursue licensure. So that happens as well. We've kind of been tracking over the years some research and data on the number of registrants on a subsequent registration number. That's shown in attachment A. We've pulled over time in 2018 and 2021 the number of individuals on a subsequent registration number, and we've also compared that now to 2022. It tends to be fairly steady. It's about between about 11 and 15%. APCCs are kind of an anomaly because we haven't had that license for very long, so you'll see a lower percentage for them. But the APCC license only started in about 2013. So those registrations are sort of, a lot of them are just becoming 6 years old. So I wouldn't really use that as a data point. But the other two have held fairly steady. We've also, using some various methods over the years, looked at time to complete supervised experience hours on average. We've pulled that from the BREEZE database system for 2015 to 2022, and that's shown in attachment B. It's held fairly steady during that time with a mean of around, I would say, just under 4 years or at 4 years for most, and a median around that hovers around 3.5. We have some older research back in 2014, but we didn't have the BREEZE database system then, so we had to pull the data differently. So it's not directly comparable using the same methodology. because it's not out of breeze, we did a sample size, and we found roughly the same thing in terms of time to licensure. And back in 2008, the board had done the same for graduates. They had pulled the numbers for ASW graduates back in 2002, 2003, and 2004. And again, the numbers held pretty much similar. So that's all included in your packet if you want to take a look. Just noting that the methods used to gather the data are not directly comparable, but they seem to suggest similar results. We also pulled other agencies through the Association of Social Work Boards, and so we were able to get a feel for kind of what other agencies do. So that's shown in attachment C of your packet. And shows findings on how they age out their hours. So there's kind of two separate discussions going on here today in terms of the 6-year rule. The first discussion we'll have is the 6-year limit on the actual age of experience hours being 6 years. Excuse me. And then the second piece of the discussion is the private practice prohibition for a subsequent registration number after 6 years. So I want to start with the 6-year limit on the age of experience hours. And so it should be noted that the 6-year limit on the age of experience hours only applies until somebody enters the exam cycle. Once somebody's in the exam cycle, they need to attempt the clinical exam each year, but they've locked in their hours. So some things that can be considered regarding the 6-year rule. We've considered a lot in the past. It seems to usually come back to like finding ways in the law to make supervision and barriers to licensure easier. And we've really tried hard via law to address that. So one possible option is to monitor the situation to see again if recent law changes that we're continuing to make help alleviate some of the difficulties in obtaining supervised experience hours. Another option would be to consider allowing receiving disability or FMLA to qualify for an extension of the allowable age of experience hours. That needs to be done very carefully. There's some issues for consideration, or volunteers might not file for disability, or people taking time off for certain reasons may not qualify for disability or FMLA. Others might voluntarily choose to leave the workforce without filing for these. There's a possibility of considering allow a registrant to request an extension if a medical professional verifies a disability or condition. We kind of do something like that with our continuing education requirement if somebody isn't able to complete the continuing education in their 2-year renewal cycle. So there's some different options. There are some other boards that we found in our research. Most boards seem to have an expiring date on their age of experience hours. It tends to be around 5 or 6 years. There's a few that have a special, they look at it in committee if there's a request for an exemption. That it seems to be pretty labor intensive across the boards. Psychology board, for example, does something like that. They consider it at the board. They reported they get about 10 per board meeting. So I would caution that with that, it might be a little difficult to be consistent. So that would need to be weighed. Also, they are a lot smaller board than us. Psychology board has about 23,000 licensees, whereas we have about 125,000. So just kind of some issues to consider with that. The second topic, the private practice for a subsequent registration number. The committee may wish to discuss whether it might be helpful to whether prohibiting private practice for those with a subsequent registration number really provides any public protection anymore or not. We have made a few recent law changes that might diminish the need for the private practice restriction with a subsequent registration number. We recently, effective January 1, 2022, strengthened our supervision regulations so that there's the regulations that have come into effect were really designed to strengthen supervisor requirements to ensure competent and effective supervision and facilitate better supervisee development and competency. And then also registrants are now, since 2016, required to have passed a California law and ethics exam before they're able to obtain a subsequent registration number. So that might be helpful as well. Excuse me. Also, we are proposing this year through our bill, AB 1759. If that becomes law, it will require all registrants to take a 3-hour refresher course in California law and ethics every renewal cycle to ensure they stay current in their profession of law and ethics, regardless of how long they are a registrant. So I have drafted some proposed language that's shown in attachment D that would show what deleting the private practice restriction for a subsequent registration number would look like. So with all of that, that's a lot of information, I know, but we'll kind of start the discussion now.
Thank you, Roseanne. The more information, the better. I appreciate your reaching out and also giving us always a more complete perspective. I know we had this conversation, like you said, every 2-3 years it comes forward over and over, but you know, it's good because things do change all the time, and it's always good to review what we are doing. Just for the sake of clarification, Roseanne, could you summarize a possible recommendation from the staff on this item?
So the language that we have drafted, it's in attachment
right.
D. Yeah, it's in attachment D. What it does is it proposes deleting the prohibition on working in private practice on a subsequent registration number. That seems to be, I think, one big hurdle to people who may have left the profession for a while and are coming back in and trying to get a new number. It seems like there's some safeguards, but of course that's what we drafted. The discussion can evolve beyond that if desired.
Okay, I appreciate that. John Sullivan.
Roseanne, thank you as always. It's thorough, it's delightful, makes me think. I think right now, as a member of the P&A committee, I would definitely support the change of language for the private practice piece. I think the information you've provided and what we've been doing as a board over the last few years has definitely opened up a space where there is still going to be very strong supervision, even if someone needs an extension. As far as the 6-year limit, I don't necessarily see a need to create an extension on that because we already have some pieces in place for specific case-by-case issues, it sounds like. And at the same time, in the past, when we've been talking about the telehealth supervision piece, oftentimes public member comments had been about in rural areas not having access. Because it looks like we're really moving forward pretty aggressively with that, and hopefully in August, fingers crossed, toes crossed, that will be approved, is that we are now providing a way for people in rural communities who may have had access issues before, a way to gather those hours in the timeframes that fit more in our averages. So I would propose no adjustments to the 6-year rule, but the language changes to the private practice piece.
Thank you, John. Is that a motion?
Matt, do you want me to state what a potential motion would be?
Yes.
Okay. A potential motion would be to direct staff to make any non-substantive changes to the language in attachment D and bring to the board for consideration as a legislative proposal.
Thank you. So that sounds like a motion, John? We can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Yes, I would like to make that motion.
Okay. Any other comments from our fellow board member? Thank you, John.
I just have a quick question, which now just left my brain.
It happens.
It was about the 6-year rule. So is there a process in place? I know when we talked about this in the licensing committee before, we had a number of commenters about illness or caretaking or military service. Is there a process now for them to extend that 6-year?
There is not. And looking in sort of some of the research that we did for other states, we were trying to kind of figure out if anybody had a really great process. The only process we're really seeing is the board meeting on a case-by-case basis to make an extension. And we looked at possible, disability or FMLA, but it really becomes an equity issue is what we really found is how do you judge one person's disability or disadvantage versus another. So you either end up kind of in a situation where you have to end up approving all of them or none of them. And so the concern would be, number one, if staff were to do it, having a consistent, across, it would be a large workload. We would probably have multiple staff needing to be reviewing these and approving them. So having a consistent decision across staff, or if the board were to do it, it would probably be a large number, and having the board, it's like, it gets into all kinds of questions of equity in approving somebody's hardship, in terms of timing of when it happened and the degree of what crosses that threshold and another. It kind of works for CE. We do that for CE now. It kind of works. CE is a much shorter period of time, and so it's not as much of a the 6-year rule seems to be, most people are getting through in 3 to 4 years. Even if they have to take a year or two off, they should be able to get through without losing most of their hours. CE is a little bit more black and white, where you don't renew if you haven't done your CE. And there's a code section that I've included in the government code that basically, if a doctor is certified, you have this, but the certification for that is very vague, and so a lot of things would fall under that. And so it's kind of how do you balance public protection and making sure people get in with current experience and be fair and equitable to everybody with their hardships and judging that. And we kind of concluded that we're not seeing a great way that other states do that's fair and equitable.
And so then on the CEs, are we largely approving any of those?
As far as I know, Steve, I think that we pretty much, if they have the medical sign off, then we just approve that. And they get it.
Yeah, we do. And we actually, it's not a very common request on that CE waiver also. So.
I think because CE can be done online now. Before, I think we got more before when I first started at this job, when most CE was not online and you had to actually go. And so if you were in the military or you had a medical issue, it would be hard to go to a class. Now pretty much anybody can sit with their laptop and do it.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you all. And also as a reminder, I know most of us know that, but just as a reminder for the record, the 6-year limit, it doesn't apply to all. So let's say you're taking 6 years to complete your hours. At the 6 years, you're going to lose those hours that you obtained on that last year. So every year that goes, you're losing the hours of the year prior after 6 years. I hope I explained that properly. So it's not like that all of a sudden you lose all the 3,000 hours on the 7 years. You're losing that one on the last year that you didn't complete. So that also gives people not to start over from zero after 6 years, but whatever hours they lost on the last year are the one that they need to recuperate. Is that correct, Roseanne?
Yes, that is correct.
Yes.
And I also want to, Marlon pointed out something, I want to just make a quick correction. The attachment of the proposed language that we're discussing, it's labeled as attachment D in the memo, but it's actually mislabeled in the attachment as attachment A. So
okay.
We are talking about the proposed language that is in your packet for this item.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Also for the record. So I'm assuming that doesn't change. Obviously, the recommendations of the motions that John Sovek moved forward. Am I correct, John?
I would just say we would make any non-substantive changes to the proposed language in attachment A/D.
Okay.
And bring to the board for consideration of the alleged proposal.
That's great. That's great. So far, we don't have a second. Is anyone else on the board moving for a second before we open to the public? Okay, I'll move for a second on this item, and then I would like to see if there are any comments from people first present in the room for Sacramento. Thank you.
Hello again, Jennifer Alley with CAMP, the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. I have a quick question. Are we just making public comments on the motion that's before the board, or are we making comments on the leave as well?
I believe the motion.
I
think the motion. That's.
Be no way in line.
Yeah.
To have it, it's just public comment for the entire agenda item.
For the entire agenda item.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Is that okay
It's
for
my
you?
understanding you can do either or. Yes.
Either or. Okay, so, because there's two issues. So the first issue, the rules, you know, when the first part of the 6-year rule, you know, CAMP does support a hardship exemption for registrants who have a change in their life where they would actually, if they were employed somewhere, they would qualify for family medical leave of absence, or even thought, you know, open to discussion on a temporary military deployment to kind of cap those hours. And so really, because, you know, and the rationale behind that, you know, for example, for, you know, somebody who's put off having children until they complete their master's degree, right, might want to take some time off to bond with that child. And if they were not pursuing, you know, licensure hours, they would get time off from their employer. And so if you consider, you know, acquiring their clinical hours required for their exam as their job, then it would kind of make sense that they would get an approved time and a pause on that. And so we just think that it'll allow for a good life balance, and it might help people get through the licensure pipeline when we don't really know why some people completed their degrees and didn't complete their clinical hours. And so we think that that would be helpful. And we also think that there are existing forms and policies that employers utilize and adhere to that are relatively kind of set in stone, right? But there are guidelines in employer law and with the CE exemption that you do. And so we would like to continue that conversation if there's no more motion today to move forward with that. On the second piece, we do not support the removal of the private practice prohibition at this time. We think that there have just been, you know, as you know, Kathy Atkins commented earlier, just a slew of changes regarding in the licensure pipeline, how they get their license, supervision rules, remote supervision, which is something we've supported. And we kind of think we need to see how those changes impact the training and education of future clinicians prior to making that change to remove the private practice prohibition. You know, we recognize that there's a shortage of health providers and access to care, but again, we want to maintain the quality integrity of the license as part of the consumer protection. So we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone present in person that would like to
one
comment?
more, Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California Chapter. I'm going to generally agree with everything that Jen Alley from CAMP just said. We are, I do think there are many reasons why, you know, people aren't accruing their hours for a number of years, such as caregiving, medical reasons, et cetera, and I would want that issue to still be explored. And I also, we also do not want to see the expiration of the prohibition on working in a private practice with a subsequent registration number. Private practices could be very isolating. It's very different from working in a public agency. And we also don't think it is appropriate for clinicians to be practicing without a full license for that many years. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Anyone else in person?
That's it on public comment here. In-house.
Okay. Moderator, if we can, unless there are any other comments from our board members.
Can I make a quick comment on the 6-year rule? I don't experience too many people coming in with the asking for a exemption in that 6-year. I mean, we do get those requests for life instances that may have caused the issue of not being able to claim those hours. But we do hear more of the issue that registrants face when they have full-time employment, and then when they get that subsequent, they're going to have to search for a new job to try to figure out how to get those hours. That's where most of our, at least anecdotally, we hear from. And in fact, I think this was brought up the last time we had a testimony where it was somebody who had mobility issues and such, and she had an employer that was willing to work with her, but because of the 6-year rule of the private practice prohibition, she wasn't able to actually continue working with that employer. So she had to move on. Just wanted to add some additional info on that. So.
Thank you, Steve. That's very helpful for sure. Moderator, if we can open to the public with a motion on the floor, and we'll continue the discussion. Thank you.
We are open for public comment. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. Our first request comes from Ben Caldwell. Bear with us just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you, and again, good morning. And Roseanne, particular thanks to you for putting this all together. I know it's a complex issue, and I appreciate how well you've addressed the complexity here. I'm speaking very much in alignment with what Jen and Rebecca have said from CAMPT and NASW California. There, I believe, would be significant demand for those kinds of hardship exemptions. Steve, I appreciate what you're saying about the fact that the board doesn't hear about those very often. But I suspect you don't hear about them very often because there's no way for you currently to grant such a hardship exemption. And I think the professional associations, when we get questions about that kind of thing, we tell folks, basically, you're out of luck because there is no process by which the board could extend your 6 years for gaining hours. And so, as Jen noted, there are good objective processes for documenting disability, deployment, caregiving, that kind of thing. And while they wouldn't capture everyone's hardship, they would, I imagine, go a long way for people who rightly could claim that they deserve an extension of that 6-year time limit. As it relates to the private practice prohibition for subsequent registration numbers, just a reminder for committee members that that policy was initially put in place, at least to my knowledge, because the board did not want to create a situation where a supervisor could have sort of an associate farm where they are constantly giving people enough hours that they're providing services and making some money for the owner of the private practice, but never enough for the person to actually get licensed. That remains a concern. We want people to get through the licensure process. And that prohibition on private practice for a subsequent registration number, while it admittedly does create some other problems in terms of continuity of care for people who've been working in private practice settings, it does serve to push people to get to the end of the process and to get licensed, which I think we all agree is a worthwhile goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben, as always. Thank you. Anyone else, moderator?
Next, we have Jerry Shapiro. I'm going to read what is written, and then we're going to send a request so Jerry can tell us in his own words. HCAI extension of SW workforce pipeline. Possible opportunity for accessing experienced social workers. And Jerry, we've sent you a request to unmute your microphone. All right. Jerry, we're going to send you another request to unmute your microphone.
Maybe that was not the intention to speak. Just to write.
Perhaps. Jerry, we see that you've unmuted your microphone. Jerry first requested to comment and then wrote a comment after. Jerry?
I guess I should start by identifying myself. I'm the director of the School of Social Work at San Francisco State. HCAI refers to Healthcare Access and Information. And the recent governor's budget and legislation passed, and I'm happy to send all of you material on this, is directing $178 million to expand the social work workforce.
As just 1 second, moderator, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that this comment is pertinent to our agenda item.
Yes, it is.
Okay, then proceed. Thank you.
So a lot of the focus, and people are really scrambling to do this as quickly as possible, is how to expand the workforce. Now, I've supervised a number of people over the many, many years. There are, I can't give you a specific number, but there's a number of former ASWs who either reached what was back then 3,200 hours and for some reason didn't take the exam, or got really close to the 3,200 hours. So instead of a hardship pathway, given the, I don't want to misrepresent it, but what seems to be emergency-like circumstances to bring people back into the workforce, and the focus on the full pipeline that is extending into LCSWs, is it possible for the board to explore some option of combining a number of previously earned hours that now are past the 6-year zone with an additional option of 900 to 1,000 hours, for example, of more recent experience that could motivate an undetermined number of resources, that is people who are close to getting their license, to get their license. And part of the reason why, as we're figuring this out statewide, we're looking toward people who are close to getting their license. As you all know, there's a dramatic shortage of appropriate supervision. So looking towards encouraging, expanding experienced LCSWs, getting those people newly licensed past the requirement of post-LCSW experience before they can license, and really thinking about innovative ways of trying to really bring people back because of the urgent need for social workers. So I've encouraged HCAI, California Association of Deans and Directors, to have conversations with BBS and see at this time if there might be some possibility of collaborating on how to create these opportunity pathways.
Okay, I would like thank you for. We're just trying to stay within the 2 minutes, and this was like a 4.5 minutes comments. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Intervene. Thank you for the opportunity as well to hear you out. I see that there are there any other comments? And moderator, if you can help me to keep the time, just to be fair with everyone, because I want to make sure that since we stated 2 minutes, that will be really helpful for myself too.
Absolutely.
To keep us all in track. It's everyone's responsibility, I'm sure, not just yours. Are there any other questions?
No other requests for comments at the moment.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And at this point, we can go back to our motion on the floor. And I see John Savick asking to speak. Go ahead, John.
So one thing I wanted to address was the curiosities about extending the private practice piece of the puzzle. And there was a mention of the idea that perhaps some licensed practitioners were maybe using associates to create an income farm. The other side of that coin would be too, though, if we have an associate who has been busy building a private practice during that 6-year period, and suddenly they no longer have access to that as a format, then they are going to have to start over in that process. And one of the things that we hear from, fellow professionals out in the field is how challenging it can be to start a private practice. So for me, saying, uh-oh, after 6 years, can't do it anymore, then when someone does finally pass, get their stuff in place, they're going to have to build that practice from scratch again. And I think that does a disservice to all of our stakeholders. So that's why I really lean into this language that's being presented about keeping the 6-year in place, looking at all of the dominoes that are now kind of tilting over to support it, to make it easier to get those 6 years of experience, all of the pieces of legislation that we as a board have been working on and are really close to everything coming into play. And then also really looking at this idea that the idea of being able to stay in private practice is an important part of the development of our stakeholders.
John, thank you. I second that concern as well. Again, are there any other comments from our fellow board members in regards to the motion on the floor?
Chair Disposti, I wanted to inquire with the rest of the committee whether there might be an openness to explore and amending the motion to look into a potential 1-year hardship or military extension for the hours for the 6-year rule. So maybe if there's a one-time 1-year extension possibility, that would give a little more flexibility to those who are experiencing medical hardships or have otherwise been deployed in the military.
You could certainly do that. I think, though, in my personal opinion, the best environment will be actually open discussion to the board, because as we remember, this is a motion is moving forward into the board. The board can decide to change this inside out if they like to do so. My concern with that is that we open a can of worms about the possible exemptions, because we have a lot of people that for different reasons might not have access to it. So it's not just for military exemption, like we said before, could be disability, for instance. But how we define disability, it's different from, there are different ways how people can be disabled for a certain number of years or months, and what is the length of the disability is allowable, for instance. Is that at the beginning of the hours, at the end of the hours? So it opened a lot of indiscretions about actually creating an unfair system. But that's my personal opinion on how troubles me to just do an exceptions. But I think it's a valid conversation. Perhaps I feel compelled to bring this to the board just for the same reasons, Wendy, so that actually that concerns of yours can actually be addressed publicly again to the board, and see if a possible motion can be revised to reflect your, your concerns and your addition and editing. So
I appreciate.
Yeah.
I do appreciate that. I think Steve's comments about that, there is this process in place for CEs now. And
Right.
So if it's a functional process for CEs, I think we could probably borrow upon that process and rely on that process for something like this. So I'm not sure if it's much of a departure as, it doesn't feel like as much of a departure for me as creating something from scratch, because we do have something in process for CEs.
Right.
I'm unable to participate in the August board meeting, so that's why I want to raise my concerns here as part of this motion. And if it's not included as part of the motion that's approved by the committee, perhaps we could just have it included in the staff report just as a concern, because I won't be there to raise the concern myself.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I know that our staff will be able to bring forward, even when there is an approval, if there is a majority approval, the motion will be able to bring forward those concerns in back to the committee as well, and to reopen the discussion as well. So thank you for that, Wendy. Any other comments or inputs from our board member? Okay. So if we're good to go, we have a motion on the floor moved by John Sobek, second by myself, to move the recommendations of staff forward into the next board meeting. Yes, if we can move to the vote, that would be great. Thank you so much, Steve.
Okay, we'll take the vote and go the opposite way again. So Max Disposti?
Yes, you're trying to confuse us. Yes.
Making sure you guys are keeping awake here. Abigail Ortega?
Yes.
John Sovic?
Yes.
Wendy Strack.
No.
3 yeas, 1 no. Passes.
Passes. Yes. Thank you so much, John. And thank you, everyone. I would like to take a 15 minutes break if it's okay with everyone. So we reconvene. It's 11:02. Well, maybe at 13 minutes. We reconvene at 15. Is that okay? Okay. Thank you all. We'll see. We are resuming our meeting in a second. Okay, everyone. I believe our board is coming back in. Welcome back, everyone. We're resuming this public portion of our Policy Advocacy Committee. Today is July 29, 2022. It's 11:15 a.m. My name is Max Desposti. I'm the board chair and chair of this committee. My pronouns are KMS. Moderator, are we recording?
We are recording.
Wonderful. Okay, then. I believe we just voted on item number 7. So we're moving to item number 8, which is the update on board sponsored and monitor legislations. Roseanne, if you can present a high-level overview.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, the legislative update is kind of the list of the bills the board has taken a position on and kind of the status. I think the ones that everybody wants to know about, AB 1758, the board's supervision via video conferencing bill proposal. That bill is on third reading in the Senate. We tried to push to have that read in the Senate so it could go to the governor before the legislature broke for its July break. Unfortunately, the legislature had other pressing things that it needed to deal with and was not able to. It agendized the bill, but it was not able to get to it. So we're expecting that to be taken up shortly after they return from their summer recess, and that is on August 1st. And so hopefully that will be going to the governor soon. We haven't had any opposition or concerns raised, so that seems to be moving along nicely. And that bill will become effective upon the governor's signature. So if he signs it, it's effective immediately. And our other bill, AB 1759, that bill is also on third reading in the Senate, so it's moving along as well. And everything else that you can kind of take a look at, and if you have any questions, you can ask. Otherwise, it's kind of just there for your information.
Wonderful. Roseanne, thank you for the insights. Any questions from the board? Okay. I believe, Sabina, should I ask any questions from the people present in the room?
Does not look like it.
Okay, thank you. And moderator, if you can open to the public to see if there are any questions to this agenda item and the overview that Roseanne has shared with us. Thank you.
We are open for agenda item 8. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And our first request comes from Adrienne Shilton. Hold on just a moment, please. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hello, this is Adrienne Shilton with the California Alliance of Child and Family Services, and just wanted to extend a huge thank you to the BBS for their leadership on these two pieces of legislation. The California Alliance has been in support of these efforts and look forward to the governor's signature. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else?
And that appears to be our only request at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you, moderator, so that we can get back to the board. And we can actually move to item number 9, which is the update on board rulemaking proposal. Usually, Christy is responsible for this, but I was told that she's not present today. Am I right, Roseanne? So you'll be the one introducing?
Yes. Yes, that's correct. So I'll do the regulatory update, and really there's just a list here of several legislative proposals that we are working on and the status. So those are listed there for your review. Also, DCA has updated their regulation approval process. So Chrissy has included in the packet here that new process. There's some flow charts that might be helpful. They're kind of color coordinated. So that's what we have for the regulation update.
Wonderful. Okay, at this point, I don't know, are there any questions from the board? Sorry, couldn't find a word. Okay, I don't believe there are any comments on this item anyway, so I'm not opening to the public. In terms of like, there is nothing to comment on. It's just an update. So at this point, we can actually move to number 10, our agenda item, suggestion for future agenda items. For our fellow board members, if you have anything to suggest, this is the time to share. Any suggestion for future agenda items for this committee, not for the board? Okay, I don't see anyone on the public on the present that is present.
Yeah, we have one.
Okay, please move forward. Thank you.
Well, hello again. This is Jennifer Alley with the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, and we do have one item that we would like to see on a future, as a future agenda item, and that would be 2 updates to the BREEZE system. The first one would be to limit the publication of a licensee's or registrant's address to only be city and state and not include their actual physical address. This is to provide some privacy for our members that may be operating a telehealth practice in their homes. And we think we'd like to avoid any unnecessary costs of having to get a P.O. box simply for an address to be on file at BBS. And the second change we'd like to see in the BREEZE update system is to prevent the use of dead names when somebody has legally changed their name, for the BREEZE system to be programmed in a manner that would reflect only the current legal name that the individual may be using and no reference to the dead name pop up. And we think that there would be a way that if there were any previous actions taken by the board, that you would be able to link those to the new name rather than what is known as the dead name for individuals that may have changed their name. And so if we realize that BBS might not be the only board that needs to make some of these similar changes, but we would like BBS to start moving forward internally with Department of Consumer Affairs, and if there's additional funding that's required in the CDA budget for BBS to advocate for general fund from the state to utilize that if it's a comprehensive change that needs to be made broader than just this board. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California Chapter. I want to support the suggestions that Jen just made and just a little more information on the address of record issue, just having the city and state. Besides privacy, it could also be a safety issue, and so that is of concern to our members, and the expense of a P.O. box doesn't sound like much, but it is for, some newly registered individuals, and also just the time and effort of going to a P.O. box. And on the dead names issue, I just wanted to illustrate that this is especially important for someone who has transitioned and doesn't necessarily want to be outed with their own name. So that's one of the reasons we're concerned about that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, both very valid concerns as well. Anyone else from the public that is present before we move to our online?
Nope, we're good here.
Okay, thank you. Moderator, if you can please open to the public comments for people that are on WebEx. Thank you.
We are open for public comment at the moment. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And our first request comes from SG. Bear with us just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone. Okay,
Oh, yes?
go ahead, please.
Oh, and please stop me if I'm not in the correct section in terms of providing this comment. It's just more so definitely requesting if this could be possible to include in future agenda meetings. As I mentioned, I'm a pre-licensed therapist, associate marriage and family therapist, and I've been having a lot of concerns and have been documenting my experience as just gaining my hours. I'm hoping that in future agenda items, people can discuss protecting pre-licensed associates. I've been consulting the code of ethics, and there's just been a lot of things that have been alarming me as it relates to unethical and illegal practices that I've been witnessing in private practices and even in organizations, whether it's insurance fraud, systemic racism, homophobic comments made. And usually, if supervisees want to make some kind of address these issues, usually there are severe consequences, and it does impact whether we could even gain our hours, let alone if you happen to be part of marginalized communities. So I just hope that, in the future, people can start to actually discuss more about protecting pre-licensed individuals. We are, I feel like, a vulnerable population. Just because there's such a huge emphasis on getting our hours, and people do take advantage of that, which is extremely sad. And whether I have actually wanted to leave this field based off of what I've witnessed. I'm a queer Black person, and I have also heard from other fellow Black therapists in terms of us getting our hours and what we've witnessed in this field. And just really even regulating some employment or labor practices would be also, if that could be included, because there are actually more barriers that's been brought up as it relates to the pipeline. Why are people dropping out? I think especially Black and Latinx or queer people of color that tend to really see these issues go on, and we're actually
15 seconds.
Thank you so much. So just
Thank you.
just yeah, hopefully just taking that into account about protecting pre-licensed folks in the future agenda items. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I just would like to address that for a second, if I may. Total valid concern. The only issue that BBS has to, we are not allowed to regulate anything that happens prior to licensing. We don't have the jurisdictions, even though, we can express those concerns. We can definitely talk about it. I think it's a very valid conversation that also spills into the licensing environment, not just the pre-licensing. Jurisdictional wise, the BBS doesn't have the, for lack of a better word, the power, the jurisdiction to regulate those spaces prior to license. I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you.
The content of your concerns is very valid, and definitely there is a space and also a place to have this conversation like this ones in regards to all our instances of how we regulate when it comes to our licensees. Just for clarification, but thank you so much for bringing your concern to us. Really, very, very much appreciated. Thank you. Any other public comments, moderator? Sorry, those are also, there are just specifically a future agenda items, proposals for any actual public comments that they are not related to any agenda items. Then we are coming back right after this. So these are just for suggestion for future agenda items.
Our next request comes from Jerry Shapiro. Hold on just a moment, Jerry. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi. Again, thank you for the opportunity to participate today. Workforce development. Again, I'm not sure how to bring this into this committee's conversation or the larger board. Things are just moving really quickly, and the more collaboration, the better. So maybe some clarification through the policy committee as to how the board positions itself to consult with other statewide agencies, professional agencies, as there is emerging legislation. And I'll try to reach out to some of the legislators who initiated some of the workforce development action and see what might be the appropriate way to bring BBS into the conversation. Whether it's just limited to the 6-year rule and how that may be modified and tailored towards workforce development considerations, or other areas where there can be statewide collaboration and how we grow the workforce. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Thank you for your work on this as well. Anyone else?
Adrian Shilton, hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
It just, again, as a reminder, I see people, the tendency to spill into just public comments. I understand sometimes it's hard to pick up the difference, but even if you have a concern, if you can translate that as a proposed agenda item, what you would like the PNA addressing in terms of topics specifically, so that will help us, because then we can go back to the public comments for anything that's also not in the agenda. Go ahead.
Thank you for that clarification. Adrienne Shilton with the California Alliance of Child and Family Services. Just was moved to comment because of the last recommendation and wanted to support that. A specific agenda item on workforce development, specifically in the public behavioral health system. We represent community-based organizations across the state that are in the public behavioral health system and have some unique workforce issues, and just really want to reiterate just how much of a crisis that we are in. We also have some ideas to share, so just wanted to echo that comment and support for an agenda item on specifically workforce development in the public behavioral health system.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that suggestion. Anyone else?
Those are all of our online requests at the moment.
Okay, so we can close and go back to the board.
Oh, and Max, I just want to make a suggestion. I think we should do the uniform standards agenda item next before doing public comment, if that's okay, and doing public comment at the end.
Say it again, Steve.
Oh, so can we, the next, I think we should do the uniform standards item next, and then we can open the floor at the last agenda item should be the public comment period for anything not on the agenda.
So we're missing an item. What item would that be? Sorry.
No, no problem. That is item 4, item number 4.
Then I think our legal counsel reached out to me. I thought for some reason it was not longer in the agenda, instead it's there. So that's fine, no problem. So at this point, let me just go back for a second so I can recollect myself.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. The item number 4. Why I don't have it here? Hold on just a second. So that was the discussion and possible recommendation regarding changes to enforcement regulations, correct?
Correct.
And that will be also Roseanne introducing that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you for noting that. I was about to close the meeting with the public session, so I'm glad that you brought this up back to us, Steve. Thank you so much. So Roseanne, if you can help us with item 4, thank you.
Sure. So we want to bring back the discussion of our enforcement regulations, our disciplinary. So what we're going to be discussing today is a document called our Uniform Standards Related to Substance Abuse and Disciplinary Guidelines. And this is a document that is used by various board stakeholders in the disciplinary process. So the administrative law judges, respondents, attorneys, board members. So we actually started, the disciplinary guidelines need to be updated. We had actually started writing the updates in about 2015, 2016, and we got board approval for some updates because they need to be modernized a little bit. But at the same time, AB 2138 went through the legislature. That made some changes to the disciplinary process, and the department and the legislature really wanted us to focus on getting that particular bill required some very specific changes to the disciplinary guidelines, and they wanted us to focus on those changes and get it through quickly. We can't run 2 regulation packages at the same time, And so we decided, given the extent of the changes that we were trying to propose with this document, we would go through and do the disciplinary guidelines related to 2138 updates back in 2016, 2017. So we worked through that process. So a number of years went by getting that through, and now we still need to update these particular, we still like to make these updates. We have a completely different board now. We had board approval for some changes, but now we have a completely different board, pretty much. We have a manager in our enforcement unit, and we have different staff, and the laws changed a lot due to 2138. So there's some different changes than what we had originally proposed and gotten approval for. That needs to also be made. So we kind of went back to the drawing board on these and regrouped, and we've have a new proposal we want to set forward to start this process again. And so the uniform standards, it's a long and complex document. We don't anticipate that we'll get through all of this today. It's going to require a lot of careful thought and consideration, but we kind of wanted to lay the groundwork and start the discussion so that Christy and her work on this has sort of some guidance from the committee on where to go next. So you'll see in your packet that you'll see that there's a lot of different changes. There's several different parts to this document. The first part of the document kind of goes through the uniform standards related to substance abuse. That was something that we had to add into this document, and around, I would say it was probably in about 2011 or 2012, based on a bill that went through the legislature requiring a lot of things regarding uniform standards related to substance abuse. So that's the first part of the document. The second part of the document is kind of an Excel spreadsheet looking chart that's our penalty guidelines that gives suggested minimum and maximum penalties for different unprofessional conduct violations. The third part of the document is model disciplinary orders. It contains optional terms and conditions and probation that the board might choose to put in a disciplinary order, and then also a list of terms and conditions that are standard. And then the last part is just sort of some standard language that can go in various disciplinary orders with some recommended language. So all of this is to serve as a guide for board members and ALJs and people that are trying, attorneys that are trying to work with a client through the disciplinary process. It's a resource for all of them to use. I just want to go through a few changes that are pretty in depth, and some that Christy had requested some additional guidance on, and then I'll open it up. We can discuss the discussion items, and anything that's any of the board members or the stakeholders that's particularly stuck out to you that you would like to discuss. We can do that as well. And then we'll continue discussing. Christy will go back and make any updates we decide on to discuss today, and then we can continue this discussion at the October P&A meeting. So the penalty guidelines, I want to talk about one of the changes there. She has clarified that the terms under minimum penalty in that column are individual terms to be selected as warranted. They don't have to always be selected in all cases, so we wanted to kind of do some clarification there. There are some proposed amendments to the penalty guidelines for sexual misconduct and chemical dependency that are somewhat significant that you can see in your packet. And then there is a penalty guideline that we needed some discussion on regarding improper supervision. And so the question regarding that improper supervision penalty guidelines, and that's on page 28 of your of the document that you see in your packet, is that suspension of a license for improper supervision is currently a minimum penalty. But is supervision warranted in cases pertaining to improper supervision? If a licensee is on probation, they're not going to be allowed to supervise. So that was one question that Christy had that she'd like a little bit more guidance on. Another question is we need to add penalty guidelines for several violations that have been added to the law over the years while this document was being amended. One of them is engaging in sexual orientation change efforts with a patient under age 18. So we've listed some minimum and maximum penalties for this, and staff selected the same penalties used for the violation of intentionally and recklessly causing physical or emotional harm to a client. So the committee may wish to review those penalties and discuss if the chosen ones are appropriate or if any modifications need to be made. And the same thing goes for some other penalty guidelines that were added related to enforcement. There was an initiative under the department that required us to add some unprofessional conduct revisions pertaining to records and reportings and investigations. So those include violations such as failure to provide records or failure to cooperate in a board investigation. So staff chose some minimum and maximum penalties based on the ones that are already in place for general unprofessional conduct and violations of the chapter or regulations by licensees or registrants. So we, again, just want to have the committee kind of take a look and provide feedback if those are appropriate. There's a couple of questions about a couple of the optional terms and conditions of probation that are listed on page 41. One of them is the relapse prevention plan. And so we'd like to have some discussion around whether that particular term is necessary. And then also our rehabilitation and monitoring program, and whether that particular term is needed as well. So I guess probably the best thing to do is kind of open it up for general discussion, and then maybe we can hit each of these points in turn. So I guess maybe general discussion first, and then we can get a little bit more specific about the questions in the memo. How does that sound, Max?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I mean, for general discussion, perhaps could be in general, like everyone can speak out to any of these possible changes. Is that what you mean? So it's not like we're picking one by one. It could be like a free fall for any concerns or considerations of comments. Is that what you mean?
That's kind of what I'm thinking, is we kind of just want to see, what sticks out to people, if anything, what they might want to discuss, and then we can get a little bit more specific.
Maybe what I will do, I definitely would like to do that with the board. Otherwise, we'll have to open the conversation 4 times, right? First general, then specific to item by item. I think there is so much at stake or so much to work on here that one of my first instinct will be, can we move it to the board and make sure that obviously this is a more comprehensive discussion that the board can have, and not to limit the conversation here, because this is actually the space where we can have it to. It just as a sense of making sure that we move forward any of these proposals, so that that we agree with or not, that it could be also an opportunity for the rest of the board to chime in into. But I don't know, that's just one of the things I was thinking, but definitely we can open to any comments that any board members can have in regards to any of these changes.
I would actually, Max, I appreciate that. We're really early on in this document, in that there's still some fine tuning that's being made by legal. I think that we could definitely probably take it to the board, but I think that we kind of want some initial feedback first, and then if the board has concerns, we can kind of fine tune as well. But it's really we just kind of wanted to start with like an introduction in committee and kind of keep it smaller and get some of the basics down, and then we can have a discussion at the full board. It's okay if this has to go back to the committee and the board a couple of times. It's an incredibly complex document. We're tackling some big issues. So I think I think that it's probably the preference is to keep it at committee level for right now, maybe now in October, and then we can kind of reassess if we're ready to go to the board, where legal is on the changes, because it's kind of complicated in that things have to go through our reg unit at the department too, and they have to approve of any changes that the committee wants and the board wants. So
Totally makes sense, Roseanne. I appreciate that considerations. It definitely goes in the spirit of making sure that we start addressing now instead of postponing. Thank you, Roseanne, for that. John Savick.
First off, Roseanne, Christy, staff, everybody, thank you. I cannot imagine the amount of work that's already gone into this. It's stunning to see what you all have done. And I personally want to thank you all for moving to the word substance use. That's been a suggestion of mine for quite a long time, and I see it throughout the document, and I really appreciate that. Also, that we're moving away from drugs to controlled substance, once again, using much more modern and appropriate language. So I thank you all for that. In general, I think things are moving in a really great direction. I do have some specific things that I'd like to address. We can take a minute to hear what other board members have to say first, and then I can bring my specifics, or we can do specifics now. What would you like, Roseanne?
Why don't, Max, is it okay since John has specific comments, why don't you want to just go through the board members one by one, starting with him, and then each board member can have a chance to do that?
We can do that. I would say let's just talk in any ways that the board feel appropriate at the moment. So yeah, John, go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, the prevention plan section, just huge question marks come up in that. Do we have a template that this is based on? Is this something that exists already in other organizations within DCA? Is it something the BBS would be creating itself? What is it? What does it mean? How do we codify it?
And Roseanne, if you want to address that, if you're,
I see writing going on, so I'm giving Roseanne.
I think that's what this is. I mean, that's what this discussion is
Yeah,
for. Is to really gather that kind of questions.
Is to kind of gather that kind of feedback so we can take it back and discuss internally with our enforcement manager and with legal. So that is, I'm kind of making a note of that so that we can take that back and kind of digest that and come up with an answer, and if anything needs to be done, go from there. So I don't really have a response like off right now, but we will.
Okay, I saw you writing, so I gave you a moment.
Thank you.
The other thing that I'm curious about is this idea of how we're looking at supervision. Let me scroll down real quick. I have to note something real quick because there's another question I have and I don't want to lose the pages. I was writing them down and they're kind of all scribbly. So I am looking now at page 39. 38, 39. Okay. Sorry, sometimes this format we use is helpful and sometimes it's hard to catch stuff.
Right.
Supervised practice. It's actually on 39, section 5, the supervised practice. When we are looking at supervisor, it has in the amended language, approval times, possess a valid unrestricted license as a mental health professional. Curiosity, because if my memory serves me, and it could be really cranky, it is a Friday, that for supervisors to be supervising associates, there are also requirements where they have to be actively in practice with a certain number of clients. So we're saying that these are people who are current in their work, not just in their supervision. Can someone help me to remember if that is correct?
Why am I trying to blank too? I believe there is a component.
I believe that these supervisors have to meet the supervisor qualifications and also the qualifications that are laid out here, but I would need to double check that with enforcement on how they handle that.
Well,
so maybe languaging has to be in there that actually talking about like the actual requirements or pointing out the regulations that say what a supervisor is. So we have language that says what that is.
Okay, that's a good suggestion.
And then I've got one more, everybody. I have lots more, but I'll just do the one more and then we'll hear other voices. Page 21 is just kind of the tip of the iceberg for this question. But one of the things we've been looking at is being more rehabilitative than punitive. That's a goal that this board has talked about multiple times at full board meetings. And I'm looking at some things that are showing up here, especially when we're looking at some of the substance use and alcohol use pieces of the puzzle, is some of the minimum standards of penalty, and this is the minimum, not the maximum, are being written at 5 years. So if we look specifically under, where is it? Sorry, I'm losing it. But if we look under the ChemDep stuff, we do have 5 years on there. We've been watching a model play out with the Attorney General's office that there's going between the 3 and 5 year model, which means that must be where our standards exist now. I'm a little bit concerned about pushing our punitive energies up to a 5 year minimum. I would like us to consider looking within that 3 years being the minimum, the 5 year being the maximum. I just think that 5 years as a minimum standard is not moving in a direction that supports people towards becoming really beautiful, powerful therapists.
Okay, I've got that. So yes. Yeah, I've got that in my notes. So thank you for that. We'll have that discussion and report back.
Okay, thank you, John. Is anything else at the moment from John?
No, I'm taking a break so other voices can be heard.
No, it's okay. It's all good. Thank you for starting the conversation. So, for our board members, any comments of first conversations around what you read and what Roseanne introduced on this agenda item? Abigail Ortega, yes.
I see a couple of proposed amendments to the penalty guidelines, and there are a few that where we want to give a minimum suspension of 60 days rather than 120 days for maybe like 3 of them. And then I see another one for 60 days rather than 90 days. Just wanted to hear more about the reasoning behind decreasing the amount of days.
Roseanne, would you like to address that? Thank you, Abigail.
I know, I apologize. Christy met a lot with our enforcement manager to discuss that, so we're going to have to, I'll point that out to her so she's ready to answer it at the next meeting, but I don't know exactly why they decided to decrease that, but we can definitely find out for you.
And I think there was the flexibility, just it is the minimum 60, so you can still do. I mean, I think, yeah, but we'll get the answer.
A lot of the, I think the ranges and the things that they were doing is they want to emphasize more that these are the minimum, but they're not, it's not a requirement that you can deviate from it. So that was probably the goal.
Yes, this is Sabina. So yeah, let's keep in mind that these are minimum, and oftentimes a different penalty may be warranted, and that's when the evidence and such would be indicated and cited in the decision.
So that's like us being in alignment with being less punitive for some cases that don't warrant like the highest. Okay.
Correct. A little bit more flexibility if the facts and the circumstances or aggravating circumstances or mitigating factors warrant something different, but providing just a minimum that is slightly lower gives a little bit more flexibility to deal with those circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
And perhaps I because it's obviously there are, especially in the oh gosh, I missed it. Like John, I was looking for my item and I lost it. But in uniform standards, in a disciplinary guidelines, also obviously there are different elements, right? Because in one way, yes, obviously we're trying to reduce the punitive approach, making sure that doesn't come to play. But then also there are things that can occur, like misconducts when it comes to sexual harassment or sexual violence or any other things that pertain, things that we have addressed in the past. Where back to this, because I had my page I lost on the box, because by monitoring and then trying to go back to the box and documents. So I'm going to pause for a second and get back and try to make more sense. Wendy, are there anything that you would like to address?
Yeah, I guess I just had some questions on number 9 on page 5 about improper supervision. The questions are asked, so the minimum penalty is a suspension of the license for improper supervision. And as a public member, so I don't always understand all of, the process that goes into all of these things, but it's potentially a better minimum penalty, the removal of the ability to supervise instead of suspension of the license to practice altogether. But I guess that may be a lack of understanding about how one, what kinds of things have to happen in order for this improper supervision process to happen. So if you can kind of help me understand how one gets to this point, and then is that indeed a proper first penalty?
No, I mean, you have to have a license too to be able to supervise. So
there's 2 licenses.
Well, to do a suspension, to supervise, you have to have a current license, and so by suspending that, you would be technically not being able to supervise at that time. How they get to? That's a good question.
Well, yeah, no, it was more the question of like, if they're struggling with being a supervisor, maybe we take away the ability to supervise, but let them still practice. Is that a better minimum penalty? I guess.
So anybody that's on probation automatically is not able to supervise. So that's one piece of it. I think that so that they wouldn't be able to, the fact that they were being put on probation and subject to the penalty guidelines would mean that they can't supervise. So I think that the question that's being asked here is it necessary to suspend their license as well, or is it sufficient if they were improperly supervising? Is it sufficient that they're on probation?
They're already, by virtue of being on probation, they're already unable to supervise.
Right. So is the suspension kind of just taking it a little too far? I guess is the question, and that is item 28. I think is optional.
Oh, it's optional. Okay.
Let me just check. No, that's a standard. No.
Yeah.
The way I was reading this, I don't know if this could be helpful or not, because obviously supervisors don't have a different kind of licensures, right? They are licensees, 2 years of experience, and with CAU. What's happening? Is it me or
no?
Here. Mike,
that was me. Sorry about that.
Is that you, Steve, again? So because we don't have 2 different licenses, obviously a supervisor is someone with 2 years of experience in practice, and also with CEUs that have accumulated based on our latest regulations allows them to become supervisors. If they commit an unethical or illegal practice, it's kind of hard to distinguish when used, if I hear it correctly, Wendy, your concern is why we're going all the way to suspend the license and put it under probation when maybe we can only reduce their opportunity to be as supervisors, but continue to practice in full license as a clinician. And the way I read it is because it's really hard to separate the two, because then it will be you had to bisect, you had to specifically talk about the circumstances when a supervisor has committed, let's say, an ethical act, like to that being with, I don't know, fraudulent behavior, or maybe even just in relationship on their supervision practice with their own clinicians, improper behavior, anything will fall under licensure. So it's not like you can really separate the two. Like, okay, you're not a good supervisor, then we're suspending the license. It usually has to do with unethical and improper behavior. So it's hard to separate the two spaces, for lack of a better word, where you only address the issue of supervision without having any repercussion on the license. Makes sense, Wendy? I don't know if that helped or maybe even confuse you more.
Sort of, but I think Roseanne was helpful in that. So if they've done something improperly as a supervisor, which gets them onto probation to begin with, and they start that whole process, then they're already not allowed to supervise.
Right.
So I guess the question is whether the minimum penalty should go right to suspension, or whether technically the minimum penalty is already addressed by the probation process to begin with, and then maybe this suspension becomes sort of the maximum penalty.
I think that sums it up. That's kind of how I feel about it too.
Okay.
That maybe
that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
And jumping right to suspension seems like a.
It does. On page 28, it's the minimum penalty for improper. It's listed as 30 to 90 days of suspension. So like maybe what I'm hearing and what I think is that maybe that should be more of a maximum penalty than a minimum, like you said, because they're already. You know, depending on the case, it may be warranted that they should be suspended, but the board might find that that might be a little bit too harsh too if it was a more minor discretion. It really depends on what happened. But to jump to suspension right at the beginning, maybe it's a little bit much.
Thank you. That was helpful. That was more my question. So.
Thank you, Wendy. Actually, that makes totally sense. I misinterpreted the concern. Any other comments from the board? Or yes, John.
Hey, I'm back. Okay, so another question I have on page 22, and this is the gross negligence and competence, is the top of it all looks clear to me, but then there's a whole section about rehabilitation monitoring, recovery support program, relapse prevention. I don't believe that belongs in that section.
You don't believe, say again, I'm sorry, John.
So if we look at for gross negligent competence, I'm going to be crossed out if warranted. There's a rehabilitation monitoring program, a recovery support program, relapse prevention. I don't believe that actually belongs in that category.
Okay. I will discuss the reasoning behind that with them here, because yeah, it does seem, I don't know if they threw that in there because it as a minimum, before it looked like it said if warranted. So I'm not sure the reasoning of listing them all. I think they sort of threw in the kitchen sink because it's gross negligence and incompetence, and that could be kind of anything. But we have to keep in mind that, you know, it's being all listed under a minimum seems a little bit too broad there. So yeah, I will bring that up.
And also my question would be is people can be brought up on more than one violation. So there could be gross negligence, incompetence, and a substance piece. So those would be two separate things, then we'd be looking at them. I think combining them under one, if we have someone who may not necessarily be familiar with this restriction, could have a gross, negligence piece and then say they have to go into recovery support.
That's a good point. Thanks for that.
And then a question in general, this whole conversation about encouraging rehab and monitoring. Do we even have the ability to include that as some type of rehabilitative attempt? I thought that we had come to an understanding that we as a board cannot require someone to go into a rehab program or a monitoring program. This might be a Sabina question, I'm not sure.
John, are you speaking about like an AA type of group, like we always?
No, there's a second thing that says rehab specifically.
So that's, I think that's older language. Correct me if I'm wrong, Roseanne. Sometimes that accidentally gets put in decisions. It's called a rehabilitation program. And I know that is older language because we don't have the support, or what's it called? Dependency support, recovery support group, I think might be.
Right, I think the new language is recovery support groups. But then also, you've noticed some occasion we'll get decisions, currently they're handed down, that also recommend someone go into a rehab program. And we don't have the ability to enforce that, I believe.
I'm not sure why not. It's been there for a long time, but way before my time. I'm not sure. Is that part of the uniform standards, Roseanne?
Yeah, from my understanding, we do have the authority to make somebody go to a rehab program. It is one of the possible penalties if they go to a rehabilitation program. So I believe we do have the authority. I will go back with Christy and our enforcement manager and have that discussion though.
And I believe if that is part of the uniform standards, I'm not sure if we can really change that. It just has to be, it's an available option.
Okay, I just know in the past we've removed it for various
Yes.
reasons. And so that's why I'm curious as to why it's continuing on.
Well, I think I think part of that reason is we didn't have that other language in there for the dependency support group in order for, like, for example, an ALJ sitting without the board. Because the ALJ was sitting without the board, they don't have that convenience and, expertise when we sit there all together and craft that decision. When we get to tell the ALJ, oh no, dependency support group is what this really is, that would be like an AA similar group. The rehabilitation program's more like a serious, potentially inpatient, potentially outpatient type of program. So I think that's hopefully by including this other dependency support language, we'll be able to fix that problem. Like you referred to, you see in these proposed decisions, you probably see a memo from me saying, typically we don't include this in these standard run-of-the-mill DUIs, right? We would like them to go to a support group. So I think that the addition will take care of that issue that you see, and maybe less rejected decisions to fix it. And maybe there will be a time when the board sees it fit that somebody really does need to undergo a rehabilitation program.
Okay.
You never know.
Okay, thank you. And then one more just to help me understand some definitions. At the very beginning of this 17, 18, 19, sexual contact with a client is a revocation. Sexual misconduct is a 7-year. And then commission of an act punishable as a sexually related crime is 5 years. Can someone help me understand the difference between those 3 violation categories and why the minimums change amongst them?
Roseanne, would that be a question for Christy to how she developed these with the enforcement manager?
It has to do, I'm looking at I'm trying to cross-reference with our unprofessional conduct section. Bear with me just for a second.
You have all the time you need. That Max is getting a hungry face, so we have to be careful here.
So the answer ties back to our unprofessional conduct provisions. Is basically there's a section in our unprofessional conduct law that makes it unprofessional conduct to engage in sexual relations with a client or former client. And then there's also committing acts of sexual abuse or sexual or an act as a sexually related crime. So that's a really broad unprofessional conduct section that has a lot of different things. Some of them might fall in sexual harassment. Some of them are more like felonies, things like that. So I think that the two sections are treating those differently. One of them is sexual misconduct in terms of the board's law. That might be, a consensual relationship with the client, whereas I believe at page 18, that's a little bit more of a law violation there, and so we're separating it based on that. So I will take that question back, and I'll have, next time we can have our enforcement manager maybe talk a little bit or get a little bit more information about the different instances where we've used those various things to explain it a little bit better.
Okay, yeah, because the difference between what's on 17 and 18, they have different standard minimums, and they sound like very similar issues we may be looking at with someone. So I'm just curious about those different minimums.
And John, just to kind of make a point there, on page 17 for sexual misconduct, that is specifically for licensees who actually terminate a therapeutic relationship to have the sexual relationship with that client. So that's the difference between that and I think the one on page, I'm not sure if it's 18 or 19. So just kind of make a difference in those two.
Thank you.
I do agree that I remember we had this conversation also when we were working on the brochures that we created a couple of years ago, if that was the time, where also we kind of like look into the possible scenarios that distinguish the penalty based on, so perhaps maybe here it would be nice to have a more understanding about the differences in relations to the possible scenarios that might occur, like they were just shared. That will be really helpful to even understand the difference, like John was saying. Otherwise it could be like, okay, well, how do you define that, right? Definitely one is consensual, the other one is not, but there was more to it. It was also in the settings and the dynamics as well. There were a lot of other references that defined the gravity of one act versus the other. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. We'll work on that and getting an explanation there.
Right. Anything else, John?
That'll be it for now.
Okay, you can always get back to it. Anyone else from any other comments from any other board members? Okay, perhaps we can open to the public to see the public that is present and then the public it's online to see if there are any comments or any specific references to any part of the document. Do you have anyone?
It looks like we have two here.
Okay, wonderful.
Good afternoon. Jennifer Alley with CAMP. I just have two quick comments, but before I make those, I know that this was a very extensive regulatory process, and the actual chart is very helpful in kind of, reading it in the way that it's summarized. We really appreciate that. And, the internal CAMP SMART people are still going through the document, and so we may have other comments in the future, and I don't know, there may be a letter drafted, but don't quote me on that. So, so again, thank you, BBS staff for all that hard work. So we actually concur with Ms. Strack's comments about suspension being a little bit severe for a minimum penalty for issues with supervision. Right, and our thought process behind that is, someone might be a really good therapist and be a really bad supervisor, right? And so you kind of want to be able to negotiate between the two. And we also don't want to make, if it's depending on what type of, issue with the supervision that existed, right? We don't want the penalty to be so severe that it kind of dissuades people from even wanting to pursue being a supervisor. And so that's kind of why we align with those comments. We'd like to see if that can be revised. And then the other comment deals with the clinical diagnostic evaluation. It's on page 36 for people that are on probation that require an evaluation. That limits the clinical diagnostic evaluation to psychologists and psychiatrists, and we are kind of wondering why LCSWs, LPCCs, and LMFTs were excluded from being able to complete that evaluation. And so we look forward to additional conversations for including us in that section. Those are all my comments on that package, so thank you.
Thank you so much. And
good afternoon, Rebecca Gonzalez with National Association of Social Workers California Chapter, and thank you for these this extensive document. I know it was a lot of work. I do want to concur with what Jen Alley said, and I also wanted to agree with the various comments about the minimum and maximum penalties. I do think there should be a range. I think the BBS has always been good about doing individual assessments of people when, you know, perhaps when they have a criminal record or in other instances. And I think those individual assessments and looking at people on a case-by-case basis is very important. Thank you.
thank you, Rebecca. Are there any other comments from the public that's present? I believe that was it. Okay, moderator, if we can open to the public that it's online and they would like to comment, this is the time.
We are now open for public comment via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And our first request comes from Ben Caldwell. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you and good afternoon, committee members and staff. I want to second what Jen was saying about the effort that's gone into this significant project. So very much appreciative of all the hours that have gone into this so far. As both Jen and Rebecca were saying, it does seem appropriate to consider whether a supervisor's license should be suspended for a supervision-related violation. That would seem to make clients sort of pay a price that is not necessarily appropriate. If someone is a good clinician but not a good supervisor, suspending their license and making them unable to engage in client care is maybe too extensive of a punishment. More broadly, though, I wonder if we're looking at some policy here in the absence of what would be really useful context. I think it's come up at a couple of meetings previously, this question of how well the disciplinary and probation process overall is working. Back in January of 2020, I had requested information on the probation process for licensees and registrants, and I got data back for the 2015-16 through the 2018-19 fiscal years. And in that 4-year span, 257 people had been put on probation by the BBS. During that time, only 42 people actually completed their term of probation, and an additional 19 had successfully petitioned for early termination of probation. So you can think of that as 61 sort of positive outcomes. And if the intention here is to get people back into good standing so that they can serve the mental health needs of clients with a maybe increased or better awareness of how to comply with all the laws and regulations associated with that care, it would seem at least as though there are real problems here, that a number of these punishments are in fact becoming career death sentences for licensees and registrants in ways that I'm not sure match the board's intent or desire. So I wonder if for the next meeting, we could come back with simply some additional data about how well probation overall seems to be working and if there are potentially some differences when it comes to types of violations. I think that would be really helpful as we continue to discuss and evaluate whether some of the recommended terms should be lessened or heightened or otherwise changed. Thank you very much.
Next, we have a request from Matt Rensi, or Rensai perhaps. Bear with us just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Matt Renzi. looking at the document, psychotherapy, as I look at it right now, it specifically says that they
Moderator, I'm not sure if it's me, but it's not coming through.
coming through very quiet. Max, can you hear me better?
No, I'm not here.
Folks, can you hear me all now?
That's better.
Excellent. So Matt Renzi, LPCC, I'm looking at page 38 of the document. Specifically under the first paragraph, it states the mental health professionals shall possess a valid, unrestricted California license to practice psychotherapy. With that wording, my first question is, would a associate then qualify to provide the psychotherapy? And if so, I have concerns about that. The second piece would be the regulation for psychotherapy there doesn't specify whether it's individual or group psychotherapy, and simply states at least one time per week. There's no like qualification on time limit or specificity around that. And I don't know that that's necessary, but it was something that I was considering as I was reading through. Would someone qualify for a group and be able to fulfill that requirement, which doesn't seem like the intent the board might have.
So I've got do you have a question about whether the license will be, could an associate qualify? Could it be group or individual? Was there one other thing about a time limit?
The time limit, it says psychotherapy shall be at least once a week unless otherwise determined by the board. Are we talking about a 15-minute psychotherapeutic session, which I don't think would be the most ethical response to that, but might meet the letter of the law there.
Right. No, those are really good points. I will bring that up. I have those three things noted. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Those are all of our requests at the moment.
Thank you. And we can go back to the conversation. And I see John Sobek. Hey, John.
So I have two thoughts. When we're looking at the numbers of disciplinary actions that the people have successfully made it through and those who may have not, and we look at the overall population of the number of licensed and associate registrants in the state of California, I would suggest that actually we have an amazing group of registrants who are, as a whole, legally and ethically practicing in the state of California. I want to suggest that maybe people that are coming under some of the disciplinary actions aren't necessarily being put into a career death sentence, but through choices and actions they have taken, have actually put themselves in the system in a way that does want to really monitor and be present with what they're doing as practitioners. I do take a little bit of offense to this idea of that the disciplinary actions the board is taking are career death sentence, but instead look at it as, well, what's happening with the larger population of our registrants? A large majority of them, if I take the numbers just thrown out, probably somewhere about 96% of them are legally and ethically practicing on a regular basis. So I just want to put that out there because I think it's important to say that I believe personally the board and the board staff are all doing an excellent job to really try and keep our organization, our registrants, our licensees to be the best people they can do in doing this work. Okay. Yeah, I'm a little bit loaded by that one. So let me take a breath. On the same line, Steve, I want to ask you a question, and this would be potentially a big change, but it would come in with this potentially. And it is the idea that with the requirement of a psychological evaluation, we are asking for the participants to pay for it. And I would be curious because the psychological eval is like kind of the first number one step in this process for a lot of people. And for a lot of them, that's where they hit their first financial barrier. And I'd be curious if there's any way with all the funding shifts that are happening in the state right now, if there is a way to create a policy or a proposal that would look at the BBS, because we're asking them to do this, to figure out how they're moving forward in their disciplinary process, for the board to actually take on creating a minimum payment standard amongst the people that we approve to be psychological evaluators, and that the board itself actually pays for that very first step in the process. I just want to put that out there as something to consider in this recreation of our standards, as something that we as a board can do to really try and help with that first step of what we're trying to do and figure out where people are and what their needs are moving forward in this disciplinary action.
I will definitely take note of that, and we'll talk about that. It's a very interesting concept. So.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? Or any suggestion, Roseanne, how to move forward in the conversation as well?
I think we've got some really great feedback to sort of chew on, and that it's definitely, Christy's done a great job on sorting all of this. I can't take credit for any of this. She's really put this memo together really, really well. I'm going to take these issues back to her, and she will work on a new draft for you to look over before the October P&A meeting. And I think that this is how we work. The best way to work through this is we just keep bringing up issues and then trying to address them and going forward. So this is a really good first start. I think that the only other thing that, I don't know if board members are done, so I don't want to cut you off, but I think one other thing that we could spend a few minutes doing is going through and giving feedback about a couple of the specific questions that Christy had that would allow her to make a little bit more progress for the October meeting. But otherwise, I think that we've got, all of the comments have been excellent, and I think that gives us really a lot to think about, which is what we were looking for.
Thank you, Roseanne. Also, for the sake of everyone that hasn't had yet the opportunity to see everything, would you like to summarize the question that Christy has so that maybe we can address them if there is interest in doing so?
Yeah, so the first one, I think that both the board members and the stakeholders already we kind of discussed that, which was the question about improper supervision and is suspension really a penalty? So I feel pretty comfortable about that. If anybody else wants to say anything more, please do after I'm done going through this. I think the next question what I would want to draw attention to is on the penalty guidelines on page 31, because this is a brand new addition to that chart. It's the engaging in sexual orientation change efforts of the patient under 18. We had kind of duplicated the intentionally recklessly causing physical or emotional harm to a client, minimum and maximum. So I just wanted to get some feedback on if there were any thoughts or concerns on whether or not what you see listed there, because it's all new text, is that appropriate or not?
Roseanne, thanks for pointing it out. That's actually the item I was looking for before. I got lost into the documents. Can you point out the page for me? So
yeah, it's page 31. It's the second violation category listed, so toward the bottom of the page.
Right.
So Roseanne, this is John Sovak.
Go ahead,
I personally am excited that we do have this in here. I think the standards look appropriate. I personally would have much deeper conversations about this, but I think considering what we do as a board and how it fits in, that the guidelines that you are putting in place follow a consistency that we're creating in these disciplinary standards.
Okay. And of course, this can be revisited as we continue talking about this down the line, but just kind of at first glance, we wanted to know if kind of, are we way off base? Are we good? So that's good feedback.
The one thing I always question is sometimes when we do law and ethics, or when we do education requirements, like we'll say a law and ethics, a business practices piece, is try and consider what we would say the education piece would be for this particular disciplinary action.
Okay.
I will, just for the sake of advocacy, because obviously it's outside our jurisdictions, but I remember 4 years ago, it came to the board a vote, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, in considering the penalty and actually the violations of reassigning sexual orientation for people that were also above 18 years old. And unfortunately, that did not pass in the legislations in California. But I just want to point this out, even as just as an advocacy conversation, that harm and damage is still as valid as it is for a minor that for a person is barely 19 or 20 or 25. And unfortunately, conversion therapy in California is done a lot for people that they are not of minor, less than 18, and it's still problematic because we're protecting a population is definitely most vulnerable, but to a certain degrees. I mean, people that are 19, 20, 20 plus, they are still subject to a harmful practice that's been proven over and over to be life-changing in terms of the emotional trauma and physical trauma that causes. And it's still very problematic to me. It's not something that the BBS can address this, obviously, because this is outside our jurisdictions, but I hope one day we can see that coming forward again back to the board so we can have that conversation again, because it's becoming quite evident how we're not actually protecting our folks that they are 18 plus in relations to conversion therapy, for instance, which is, devastating to me. But that was an outside comment that keeps coming up every time we're talking about this. So thank you for allowing me that. Anyone else? Roseanne, anything that you would like to point out based on the questions that Christy was addressing?
Yeah, so continuing on, so I think that we've got good feedback on that one. The next would be page right next to that one, page 32 and 33. There's some other penalties that we added that were based on more of like the general unprofessional conduct, and that has to do with things like failing to provide records, failure to cooperate. So I know that it's a long list, it's detailed, but I would just, if you don't have any feedback today, I would just ask that you take a close look for the next meeting and see if you have any specific concerns to bring up about those. We've tried to do the best we can in trying to do those consistent with other penalties, but we would welcome feedback for that as well, of course, as with anything.
Thank you, Roseanne.
And let me see if I have, okay, just two more things. Christy wanted to discuss on page 41, we have a talk about a relapse prevention plan. And I know that when we met to discuss some of these with enforcement, there were some questions about whether that's even really, if we really want to include that as an optional term. It's pretty much for people that don't meet the criteria for a recovery support program. So maybe the board thought it would be helpful to send them to a recovery support program, but the recovery support, they get there and the recovery support program says, no, you don't qualify to be in our program. So would requiring a relapse prevention plan that's submitted to the board be helpful? Or would it not be helpful? Or is it too personal? Or is it beneficial to have them submit it and turn it into the board? I just kind of wanted to get some thoughts on that. So it looks like John.
So oftentimes in some of our probation meetings, people will present with relapse prevention plans. And oftentimes we as a board will question them, where they got their ideas from, their information from. And oftentimes the sense from the board is that we don't necessarily put a lot of weight into that. We're looking more for their actual personal commitments. And I'm just wondering, I mean, do I just go online, get a template and say, by the way, here's my rehabilitation plan and hand it off to you? Is it actually going to be doing anything? Is there anything enforceability if they don't follow that plan they've submitted? Is it just opening up more paperwork for the probation monitors?
And in addition to that, Roseanne, one thing that stand out to me first was the time period that we allowed for that. 15 days seems very challenging, because then again, it goes back to what John was saying. It could be just something you write on the go because you have to submit it in 2 weeks. So I feel even the time frame might be a little bit too limited, because it doesn't allow to a true route experience on a plan that perhaps is discussed with the therapist, or with the recovery journey. So the time for me was more of an issue. That I know is standard for many other things, but in this case, for this specifically, might be a little bit something that I would like to discuss, and maybe extend it beyond the 15 days. And I know it's not just on that. I know it's throughout the documents too, in the rehabilitation.
Okay.
And Abigail, thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to add, perhaps like we can change the language from like that it's a requirement for possibly getting assessed if that's needed, and if it's not, that they can get clearance, that's not needed. Because like,
So don't make it mandatory unless the board determines that the particular person needs it.
or they're the person's therapist, right? That knows, that has created a plan with them, that they right, if they recommend it, that then they get assessed further. But ultimately, it's the centers that have their own criteria and will also notify, right, the person if they're eligible or not. So I'm not sure of the exact wording, but it just gives a little bit more of like flexibility for people that need it to receive it, and for those that don't, that that they still did their due diligence.
Okay. Thank you.
Roseanne, any other?
Is there anything else on that one before I move on, and then we'll open up to public comment again at the end on these?
Okay.
Okay, so that was that one. Then the last one is the rehabilitation and monitoring program on page 41. And so the questions regarding that was, we've made some revisions to this section, but staff feels there's a possibility that the section might not be necessary. It appears to make more sense for a board with a diversion program, which our particular board does not have. Not everybody, even though it's an optional term, but not everybody qualifies for a rehabilitation and monitoring program, depending on where they are. And some programs, they just duplicate what the board is requiring. So there's just kind of questions that it may not need to be part of the disciplinary order.
Roseanne, this is Sabina. Are you on page 41 of the document or 41 of the DGs?
Page 41 of the document is the term in question of the actual document, the Uniform Standards document. So that number is in the lower left-hand corner.
Got it. Thank you. I was trying to go back and forth between the two different page numbers, and I was
yeah, I know there's a lot of different page numbers flying around. And if there's not any thoughts on this, that's okay. Maybe you can bring your thoughts to the next meeting too, if it's
So
it's
Roseanne,
kind of a
this is
big
John
question.
Sovek.
Yes.
In regards to my previous comments, I would encourage us to remove that. Once again, recovery is a very personal experience. And if we're looking at substance use disorders, it's once again, board approved within 15 days. All of that languaging, I think, is very constraining for a person who was actually pursuing recovery. So I would encourage actually removing 8.9 completely.
Okay. This is Sabina. I think we've got to double check to make sure it's not part of the uniform standards, right, Roseanne?
Okay.
Because I don't know if we can remove it if it is part of that.
Okay.
We'll just double check all that, you know, and bring that back as a potential option if it is an option to remove it.
Okay, I will do that.
And just a reminder, this is Sabina again, just because something is an option to include doesn't mean it's always going to be in there, right? Unless it is, I think those are all optional terms, correct? We're looking at on page 41.
These are, yes, these are optional terms. That is true. Okay, does any other board members have any comment about that one? Doesn't look like it. Max, that's all that I have. Do we want to open up to public comment?
Yeah, I would like to, just because we added more in the conversation, so that will be just assuring us that everyone had the opportunity. So yeah, if we can see if there is anyone present that would like to comment on any of the discussion that we had so far.
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW, California. The one I'm going to comment on, and I almost pause in commenting on this one, is about sexual change orientation efforts on page, I guess that was 31. NASW was active in working on this bill to ban this practice, so we definitely have very strong feelings and are happy that this is law. But when looking at the penalty section, it has a psychological psychiatric evaluation, psychotherapy. I guess that didn't make sense to me for this particular violation, because I think that you know, therapists that are doing this practice, it's not really a problem with their own mental health. I think they may be stubbornly practicing something that is not working and is not valid, and they need to be educated and definitely have restricted practice, but that portion of it didn't make sense to me.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Do we want to call for a public comment for those that are on the webcast? It doesn't look like there's any more here.
Okay, thank you for letting me know, because again, I can't see the whole public. Thanks a lot. Yes,
I forgot too.
I'm not there. Moderator, thank you. If you could please open. Thank you so much.
We are once again open for public comment. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, would you like to return to the agenda?
Thank you. Yes. Okay.
Okay, so I don't think any action is needed here in terms of a motion. What I will do is I will take this back to Christy, and we'll have some internal discussions with enforcement, and we'll kind of put our heads together, and Christy will look at these questions and come up with a new draft and some potential answers to some of these questions for the October meeting, and we'll do this again. And then we'll kind of, at that point, we'll assess, whether the committee feels it's ready to go to board, or if more committee meetings are needed, or kind of where we're at from there.
Love it. Thank you, Rosanna. Please make sure that Chrissy knows how much we appreciate the hard work. I know she couldn't be here today to hear us out, but we appreciate her and your work on this, because it's really helpful for us. It really guides us through. It's much easier for us to identify possible issues or things that we'd like to add. So thank you. Thank you so much.
We'll definitely let her know. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point, I think we are moving to our last agenda item, which is public agenda item number 11, which is public comments for items that are not in the agenda. This is the time where you are more than welcome to address any issues that don't have to go into that agenda item. Please remember that the board might not discuss or take any action on any matter raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place in matters in the agenda or future meeting that what the board will consider. So I start with you all, fellow board members. So if you have anything you would like to comment or to report, this is the time. Okay. And then I'm moving that request to the publics that are present in Sacramento, if they would like to share anything on the public comment session.
I think there might be one. No, okay, never mind. Nope, there's none here.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Roseanne. And moderator, please, yes, if you can go to the public and see if there are any public comments for items not in the agenda.
Absolutely. We are now taking for public comment for items not on the agenda. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And while we're waiting to see if we have a request, can I get some clarification? There was a request for comment on agenda item 9 that was never addressed because we didn't open for public comments on agenda item 9. Would now be an appropriate time to deal with that?
I need to ask legal. Sabina?
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry about not opening up at that moment. I'm assuming that was the update. I believe, if I remember correctly. Yes. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, and that's fine. We can accept public comment on that. Going back to that agenda item for anybody who also wanted to comment, and then we can finish with our public comments for items not on the agenda. Gosh, that's a mouthful. Thank you.
So Sabina, I'm sorry. So if I understood properly, we're going back to item 9, or we're just allowing the speaker to speak to it?
Yeah, we can grab that public comment that was inadvertently missed, and then just continue with your current agenda item.
Okay, just want to make sure I heard you correctly. Okay, thank you, moderator. Yes, please.
All right. If that individual wishes to make their comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box or raise your hand by dialing *3. We're going to wait just a few seconds now. Yep. We have a request for public comment from Ben Caldwell. Hold on just a moment, please. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much, moderator. Thank you, Chair Disposti. And I appreciate the opportunity to come back to this. It really was just a question for Roseanne, because this was the regulatory update. Wondered if you had any sense from OAL of when the regulations might be approved and when they might take effect. Thank you.
Ben, which ones are you? Which regulation package are you referencing?
This is the moderator. Hold on, we're unmuting Ben again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's the most advanced one. I think it's the one on. I'll pull it back up here. Yeah, the one on CE and additional training requirements.
I know that that Christy has been working with with DCA back and forth to kind of tie up a few loose ends on that. So I will ask her to email you with the actual status of like what we think is going to happen.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
And that appears to be.
Yeah.
My apologies. That appears to be our only request for public comment at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Thank you, moderator. So we can actually close the public comments for items that are not in the agenda for the public. And coming back to our board members, we're moving to item 12, which is our adjournments for our next policy advocacy committee. So we are closing at 12:51 on July 29, 2022. Just a small reminder that in 2 weeks we will have our board meeting in person, but also we'll allow people to join in via WebEx again for comments and for interest. So we'll see you in 2 weeks, everyone, and thank you all for participating. Thank you, staff, as well, for always being so amazing in supporting our work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adios.